So let's take past lives. I think that's a great example, right? So if I were to ask if someone was talking about their past life experience and whatever, and I were to ask that person, do you know with absolute certainty that what you're speaking about is true? I don't think that person could say yes, with absolute certainty. They could say yes.
It's
right?
a possibility, but
they could say, but do you think that we can know something like that with absolute certainty?
No.
Right.
No.
Right.
Because it just brings up this whole conversation, dude. And I completely understand what you're saying, because you can get too identified with things you don't actually know are true.
Yes.
And so that's the thing I've been exploring. I don't know if you saw, but I posted my first skit in a while.
Nice.
Okay. And I've been contemplating doing skits for like 6-7 months.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's a really good way to start to express, because you don't have to be super serious and say that it is this way. It for sure is this way.
Yes. Yes.
And I think living from a place of, we don't have to be certain, but we can explore what could be.
Yes.
That's why when people ever ask me, are you a starseed? Are you a wanderer? And I'm just, every time I hear that question, I'm just like, I know how much comes with that. And I'm just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Could be.
Could be.
And that's where I like to stay.
Yes.
Because
in the could be space.
Right.
Yes.
Because if you become too certain and then you start to put yourself into this group of people who is this.
Yes.
But it's like, I also don't want to invalidate people's experiences, because a lot of people do have these type of experiences. Like I just talked to, here's a actually great example. I just talked to Robert Grant, and this will come out after that, so it's not a spoiler. He was talking about how he has met ETs. And so I think if you've met them, like if you've if that actually happened for sure,
yeah,
I believe him.
Yeah.
If that did happen, then I think that's something you can say, okay.
Yeah.
You can say for certain
yes,
that happened. But it's like, how much can we trust our own? This is such a hard thing because it's not provable, but we also don't want to stay within the confines of provability as well.
Right.
So it's like, what's the balance between science and spirituality? This is like where I feel like most of my work is. It's like, it could be.
Right. Well, I mean, an interesting path to go down with that is, do we need to prove it? Like,
Right.
does it need to be proven? Because the way that, okay, so let's say Robert Grant and meeting ETs, I'm open to everything being true. I'm open to it being true that Robert Grant is like the continuation of Leonardo da Vinci. 100%. That would be amazing, right? I like that could be space. It's fun to play with that. I think where a lot of people, where the vulnerability is moving into the space of thinking that we're convinced of something that we have faith in. Thinking that it is true with absolute certainty, when really it's just something that could be true. Because I think what happens is, like, if someone is constructing their identity on an idea that they're a starseed and all that, they're really just setting themselves up for a whole lot of philosophical vulnerability. Because if you're basing your identity and you're constructing your safety on something that you can't actually know with certainty, you're going to take LSD, or you're going to smoke weed, or you're going to have a moment where you're like, whoa, that actually may not be true. And if your safety is constructed on something like that, you set yourself up to crumble. So the question I would ask people is like, okay, so you're a starseed. What does that belief do for you? What experience does that create? Oh, well, I like knowing that I came for this with this purpose. And like, I don't even really know what a starseed is, but like, I came with this particular purpose. Okay,
or
so
I'm from a different planet.
I'm from a different planet. I came, right? And I love that shit. Like, I want the answer to be yes.
It would be nice. It would be cool.
Yes, it's so cool. It's beautiful. Really, it's beautiful. And like it probably is likely that it's true.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that, it just makes sense that something like that would happen. But I would say, what experience does that create for you? So I have a clear purpose. I know my lineage. I know what I'm here for. Okay, so when you're clear on those things, what does that give you access to? What experience does that give you access to? Well, then I feel more grounded. Then I feel more confident. Then I feel more at peace. Okay, so what you want is groundedness, confidence, and peace. And currently, you're using a narrative of being a starseed in order to access groundedness, confidence, and peace. That's certainly one strategy, but there may be more sustainable or better strategies available.
Mhm.
So back to what I was saying in the beginning, with everything is an experience, that's what I'm talking about. And I just see us accessing experience in different ways. Some are more sustainable than others.
Dude. Yeah. That's it. That's it right there. And to even play devil's advocate even more for this, it's like, I've studied law of one, and a lot of people know that. And that's kind of where I started out. I'm really into channeled stuff, and I'm kind of moving in a more general, broad thing because I see the limitations of channeled material, and you lose so many people in this type of thing. And I say this pretty much every podcast. But specifically pertaining to Starseed, if you are to take this channel material seriously, like a law of one, it says that negative entities will the main way that they communicate is through telepathy and through dreams. So if you had dreams that you were this or you were telepathy, it could actually be even put there by negative entities to try and get you to steer you away from another path so that you think this is what you're meant to do. But can we even trust that?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That's another thing that I haven't really gotten too much into, like dream prophetic stuff, because I see how much this has caused wars. This has caused so many things when prophets say the world's going to end or these people are bad or whatever it might be. Like, it's almost as though when you kind of identify as something that other people can't be, that causes a sense of separation for then there to be like, I think that's how a lot of wars get started. That's the start of kind of religious overtones that we are the elect. You know, if we're going back to even Christian or holy, or, you know, holy is in Roman kind of Catholic interpretations of what they are and what these people aren't and what separates them. And I think it's fine to have that interpretation, but I 100% agree with you. And that's why I don't really talk about that. That's why I'm not into it as much. And I talk about how it could be true. Sometimes I mention Dr. Michael Newton. The first podcast I ever did on this podcast was number one about Dr. Michael Newton and Journey of Souls and that whole book. And I did like a book review kind of thing because I thought it is fascinating.
Yeah.
And the way that it worked, just like you said, it doesn't make sense. But in the end, I found it to be something that I can't rely on that. Do you know what I mean? There's a sense of relying on that identity to fuel you instead of just saying, I don't even know.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I'm at. I don't know, but this thing seems like some people think it's a complete suffering, and sometimes I see it as complete comedy. It's like it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
You know, and we don't really know what's happening.
Well, the crazy thing about it is we don't know, but you do get to choose how you see it. So I see when I'm speaking about utility, I see things as tools. I would see beliefs as tools, right?
That's interesting.
So if you believe that this is a comedy, that belief is a tool that creates a particular experience. When you see this all as a play or a comedy, when you choose to see it that way, you can then check in with yourself and ask, well, what experience does that create? When I see this as a play and a comedy
or a game, right?
right?
The game, right?
Actually, when it's a game, I feel more confident. Like a funny example. So Aubrey Marcus, you know, he was just, I don't know if it's Jake Paul or Logan Paul, one of the Pauls who
I already
fight.
know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
He was at their fight.
They were there, right? Yeah. So he was there with this breathwork guy, Lucas Mack. I don't know any of these people personally, just seeing this as an observer, right? Yeah. So Lucas Mack, this woman named Blue of Earth, she actually like her a lot. She's very sweet. And I'm watching this thing happen. It's Logan or Jake Paul, whichever one of the Pauls, and this team of people who have now, as representatives of like the cloaked sage sound bowl breathwork world have now entered the mainstream and are wearing what's that
Are you talking about
festival?
clothing?
Yes. What's the
Burning Man?
Burning Man, right? They're
Yeah.
all wearing Burning Man gear. I'm watching this thing. I'm like, holy shit. Everyone in this room right now is stress testing the rules of the game. They are playing the game to the max, seeing what they can get away with, and they're getting away with it. Like, it's fantastic. It's beautiful to see people playing the game at that capacity, you know?
Yeah.
And so when I choose to see it as a game and choose to see that these people are just engaging in strategies to create an experience they want, that choice is a tool for me to access more confidence, because then I'm like, oh, then I can play this game too. It's also a choice where I could be like, these people are fucking frauds, like this, like, and that creates an experience of contraction or fear in me and makes me
Or even
less
pride.
or pride, right?
Yeah.
And all I would ask myself is, when I'm feeling pride or fear or contraction, is that the experience I want to have? If yes, then I'm going to continue to see these people as frauds. If I'd like to feel expansive and joyful and loving and confident, then it makes sense for me to see these people as like other game players who are just pushing the limits and celebrate them.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they're just expressing themselves and kind of taking this stuff that used to be really esoteric and just kind of seeing the application of it in, a more broad sense. And I think that's something that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to lead the charge too.
Someone's got to do that. Yeah.
And I mean, there are aspects that for me, it's complete speculation and, personal preference, how they do it, yada, yada. Would I have done it the same way? It doesn't matter.
Mhm.
Doesn't really matter, because they're just doing what they believe they're just expressing themselves.
Yeah.
So I can't say it's better or worse.
Right.
So I just let them do them.
Right. So when you say it doesn't really matter, what do you think does matter
in life?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a big question.
Like how do we know what matters and what doesn't matter? What do you think?
Okay, that? Yeah. So I would go to Stoicism for this. Stoicism very much focuses on the concept of what you can and can't control.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say it doesn't matter what I think of them, they're probably not. I can just go down the thought process of, well, if it did matter, how could it matter?
Mm-hmm.
Well, do they care about what I think? No.
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to change what they do? No.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be a waste for me to even say they could do it better or worse? Mm-hmm. If it's really something as nuanced as, did they do anything bad or wrong?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I say that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But if it's something that I can control, like if I was in that situation, how would I do it? That would matter to a certain extent. But then you can get lost in the mind game of, well, I'm not even doing it, so why am I thinking about it?
Yeah.
So it's like a waste of time, if that makes sense.
So if it's so what you're seeing is like, whatever choices they're making, what they're doing, it doesn't matter. They're not hurting anyone, and you have no control over what's happening.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So in that, what I hear there is like, what matter means is like, if that's the case, then it doesn't make sense for this to impact me in some sort of intense way.
Exactly, dude.
Right.
And I think that's why so many people get completely lost.
Right.
Is trying to control or comment or say, and I think it can be valuable sometimes, but in that, like, if we're talking about the context of that situation, it doesn't matter what my opinion is of them.
Right.
Now, if they were doing something crazy, or if they, if it was something where I felt like calling it out or saying that it was this, I think that can be useful.
Yeah.
When it comes to like we just talked about starseeds, I think that's something that like you're saying, the utility. I like that word. I haven't heard it said like that, but the utility or value of them being identified might actually hinder more than it'll help. But if they're doing sound bowl stuff for Jake Paul before his fight, hey, just get it then,
Yeah. So I really like this example of because what we're kind of talking about here is judgment. We're talking about the experience of seeing someone do something and having a perspective on what they're doing, and then that perspective creating some kind of internal experience, right? I really, really, I think this is such a helpful way to explain how to not judge. So this person a couple months ago DM'd me this person's account who, like, most of her content is about criticizing people who make money in the spiritual community, like coaches and guides and whatever else,
Yeah.
right? So she has this one post, like the top 6 ways that spiritual whatever like scam people out of money.
Mm-hmm.
And the top 6 ways are like, you've probably heard all these things before. Like in order to make a lot of money, you have to communicate to the universe. You have to give a lot of money to make a lot of money. Communicate. You're ready for that. I had something like I had a calling to reach out to you, and I think we're supposed to work together, like that. Those sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
So this person was like, who DM'd it to me, was like all worked up and was like, I hate when people do this. Like there's such a fraud. It's such a scam. So that person is all worked up, right? And the way that they're seeing spiritual people, the way that spiritual people make money, the way that they're seeing that is creating this experience of being worked up, right? Did that person choose to be worked up? Probably not. And if they were to make a choice about how they wanted to feel in response to seeing that, they probably wouldn't choose to be worked up about it. Maybe they would.
That's
Maybe.
a really interesting, really getting into the intricacies of that, because did they choose to get worked up?
Yeah.
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Because you can think, well, maybe they did choose unconsciously.
Yes.
Because they were passive.
Yes.
To what they believe.
Yes.
But they don't even know that they believe it.
Yes. Yes.
You know?
Yes.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. But it's not always like, I think it's very interesting. Sometimes people can choose it, sometimes they can't. But in this world, I've really started to notice that when you don't choose, it's like something will choose for you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And usually what's choosing for you is your unconscious or subconscious conditioning. Yeah. So what I would guess, and I'd ask this person more questions, but there's a part of him along the way, he's learned that being a scammer is a bad thing, and that we are supposed to reject people who are scammers. And so when the concept of scammer enters my awareness, I need to make sure that I'm doing the thing of rejecting that in order to be included by the people who also reject the scammer, right? Yeah. So he's afraid of not being included in the rejection of the scammer group, right? And his opinion of this person is chosen for him based on this subconscious fear of not being included in that group. That's how I would see that. And he probably didn't choose that experience, just like you're saying, it like was subconsciously chosen, not consciously. So for the like spiritual scam thing, here's how I see it, right? A person wants to make money. We all want to make money. Money is a tool. It's a strategy for us to experience life the way that we want to. Why do you want to make money? So if I have this amount of money, then I have these things. I get these experiences. I get these feelings. I feel it amplifies my experience of love, amplifies my experience of groundedness, joy, those sorts of things, right? So money, ultimately, because it amplifies the feelings that we want. So if a person is selling something in a scammy way, one, I would ask them, how do they feel when they are selling in that way? Because if what they want is groundedness and joy, and they're selling something in a scammy way because they think ultimately that's going to give them groundedness and joy, but the way that they're selling makes them feel like icky, well, then they're just using a strategy that's not effective to produce the result that they want. And so it's not about judging that person as a bad person. They just may not be clear on what they want, and they may not be clearly evaluating the strategies that they are using and could be using in order to get what they want, which are feelings. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So that to me is the way of stepping outside of the judgment space where it's like, what does this person want? And are they going about getting what they want in the most effective, most sustainable ways?
Why? Let's get into this concept of spirituality and money,
Cool.
because this is one that I'm passionate about.
Yes.
And it's a passion of mine because I see how much there is BS. There's BS in many ways. I think just a baseline grounded thing to say as we talk about this is there are scammers and there are people doing it in ways that are not integrous in every community.
Yes.
Not just the spiritual community, in business. Of course, think about how many corrupt businessmen there are. There's always corrupt people in the spiritual community too. Yes. But why is it that you think that there is this stigma against spiritual people making money or doing well? You know, what are your thoughts on that?
It's a really great question. So, okay, if I were to ask a person, visualize your bank account and what amount of money do you want to see in there, right? I mean, I'd be very surprised if there were people who actually wouldn't want millions of dollars, right? I think that we want money and it makes sense.
Yeah, except for like the extremely evolved, high level, like I think it's a very, very small percentage of people that have transcended that desire.
Like actually don't
like for
need
sure.
it. Like actually, yeah. I could see, I'm totally open to that being the case.
Like I'm
right?
talking about like Buddhist monks or like Zen masters or people that have been practicing meditation for a long time. You know what I'm saying?
I agree. Yeah. And I think that probably that there would also be a lot of people who do say no because they think that who they are is supposed to be a person who rejects people who want money. Right?
Yeah.
So,
wow.
And that okay. So visualize the amount of money you want in your bank account. Okay. $100,000. Got it. Now, another visualization exercise. I'm going to give you a piece of paper and some crayons and think about what you want to draw, right? Like, okay, got it. Yeah. People see money in the bank account as different than sitting down with crayons and drawing a picture, but to me, it's the exact same thing. There's all this charge and loadedness with the money thing because, well, for a lot of reasons, but there's all this like persona stuff in there. What it means to be a person who wants money.
Or spiritual. What it means to be spiritual.
What it means to be spiritual.
Yeah.
That spirituality is supposed to be about the rejection of money, right? Which is all investment in persona. It's all investment in this is the way that I need to be seen. And if I'm seen this way, then I will be safe, right? Then I will have the things that I want to have if I'm seen this way. To me, there's no difference between sitting down and drawing on a piece of paper with crayons and actualizing that drawing and actualizing the experience of having money in the bank. Now, with both of those things, I could sit down and I could draw like something highly offensive or something that would hurt people. I could also make money in a way that's offensive or hurts people, right? So that gets into the experience. What experience do I want to have while drawing? What experience do I want to have while making a certain amount of money? If I want to have an experience of love and joy while drawing, it's likely that I'll draw something that people enjoy. And some people will reject it, but like it's not harmful. And the same thing with money. If I'm keeping myself accountable to making money in a way where I'm having the experience I want to have, loving, joyful, grounded, then it's likely that I'm making money in a way that is producing those things in the world, not harming people. But I think that people think that money means harm.
Yeah, money means harm for sure. And I also think it's really rooted in something to do with being more spiritual means less money because you're not attached to it.
Right.
But I think that in the world that we live in, the reason why spirituality is so, and I'm not even really considering myself in the spirituality category because I talk about so many different things, but specifically when it comes to these topics that seem more nuanced or esoteric or things, I think one reason is because it's a different way of thinking, but it's also because the power dynamic of the people that talk about these things is very minimal versus the people that don't talk about these things.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you just want to be an entertainer and you just want to make people laugh, it's like, well, you're just making them laugh within the confines of this is the way they think, and you're making that ironic or sarcastic,
Mm-hmm.
and that's causing them to laugh, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's good comedy. But then why is it that these other concepts we aren't able to do as well over here, or people think that you shouldn't make enough money doing over here? It's because there's some sort of actually think it's a little bit more manipulative than people will suspect. I think it's actually a way to keep the people that are open to a broader interpretation of the universe that is not within the confines of the specific way that most people think.
Mm-hmm.
It's to keep them down, because when people don't have a lot of money, they can't really influence the way that the world is.
Right.
And so I actually think it is about the identification and seeing basically what is the way that people see money as something bad.
Yes.
Whether that's harmful in whatever way that is.
Right.
And so it can come out as people thinking that if you're spiritual, you shouldn't make any money.
Uh-huh.
You should just, do what the Buddha did before his enlightenment, which was just take donations or do these things. And I think in a world where everything was provided for everyone for free, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But in a world where I got to pay, we're here in California, got to pay $6-7 to fill up, per gallon of gas. It's like, you need to learn how to make enough money to survive, but also elevate. Because think about it. If people who are conscious, I guess we can say conscious in this context.
Yeah.
If people who are conscious make more money, what are they going to be able to do? They're going to be able to influence more people.
Right.
And when they influence more people, again, going back to what do you feel? Remember, that's what it was about. What do you feel when you're like making content or you're taking in their content? If it's positive or if it's good or if it's a sense of peace or it's laughter, whatever it might be, or maybe it's even just inquiry into the way that you think.
Mm-hmm.
This allows for more people to be reached, and then eventually the world changes. So it's not, I think that's why it's such a fallacy to think that spiritual people or people that are conscious can't make money, because it's like the more that they do, the more influence that they'll have, and then the change we want to see in the world. It's like, then it comes back to this: what separates your identity from someone who's not spiritual?
Right.
And then that's where I think the starseed comes in again, and it thinks that it becomes a problem.
Yes.
Because then they can't be like you.
Yes.
Because it's kind of like being born a certain way.
Yes. Yes. What came through as you were saying that, what became clear, it's like, to make it as simple as possible, I think we have a narrative that spirituality is supposed to be about the rejection of the ego, and to want money is an egoic pursuit, right?
Yeah.
I just I signed up for notification. I don't even know how to pronounce Quora. Do you know what I'm talking about? The place where you ask questions and people answer. So I signed up for notifications from there because I'm interested in the questions that people ask. And I got a funny email today, which was like, is Eckhart Tolle
However you say that. I struggle with that one too all the time.
Is he enlightened?
Yeah.
And the response that someone gave was like, yes, he is part of a small percentage of people in the world who are enlightened. We know he's enlightened because he recognizes the madness of the ego and has transcended the madness of the ego. When I read an Eckhart Tolle book recently, I did not feel good reading that book because I think I was picking up on rejection energy at the way that he rejects the ego. When I reject something, I feel contracted. I'm in a fear state, right? So if I'm rejecting anything, then I'm perpetuating a state that I'm rejecting it because I say what I want is love, right? Yeah. But my rejection of that thing, creates an experience that I don't want to have, right? Or that I say I don't want to have.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the money in spirituality is that spirituality is supposed to reject egoic pursuits, and wanting to make money can only be about an egoic pursuit. Now, the thing is I think it is an egoic pursuit. Like, I think it is an egoic pursuit that I think you and I are both using our egos right now. we're using our egos as tools to create followings, to make a particular impact on the world,
Yeah.
right? So wanting money to me is egoic, but should we reject things that are egoic? That I'm not sure. I'm curious what you think about that.
That's a big topic because there's so many people that say that it's absolutely terrible, and then you got the whole concept of the spiritual ego, and that's a whole nother conversation as well. But I think there's a difference in the way I've actually never been asked this question, so this is a great question. But there's a difference in the way that you interpret ego. I think there's different levels of it. So let me just give a personal example. I want to make money so that I can impact the world to facilitate a change in the way that we perceive it, which will, with the goal of perceiving our planet, perceiving each other and the planet itself in a more harmonious state, which will allow us to come together and facilitate a change that is beneficial for us as a species and the planet as a whole, nature itself. So then you got to ask yourself, well, that seems like a pretty valiant, honorable reason to make money. Should you reject that? Should someone reject the want to help others? If it's using the tools we've been talking about of money, is that a bad thing to want that? And that's when you think about what is the different levels of it.
Yeah.
If you want money to just have things, that's a different conversation. And I don't think it's a bad thing to have things either. But again, what utility do the things provide?
Yes.
For example, I want to take this podcast on the road and go around the whole country and podcast out of a truck and a camper. It's the thing I've been working towards for many years. And it's like, that's the goal. And I'm getting closer. And it's like, well, I want the thing so that it can facilitate me living in a way that is easier. Because I lived out of a rooftop tent for a year. And I did that out of a car. Me and my girlfriend and my dog all lived in a car. So we lived the roughing it life. We lived out of a tent, and it's just not for me anymore, And so it's like, I want a better living situation for myself. Is that wrong? Is that bad? So that's why I think if you're taking a whole rejection of everything,
right,
then what are you going to do? Are you just going to be homeless on the side of the street and live a life of suffering and just learn to transcend that suffering? Or can you learn to play the game, how the game is played from within the game? Like what I'm talking about, it's like the game requires you to make a certain amount, but it also requires you to, if you want to feel a sense of fulfillment, at least this is my requirement for it's different for everyone.
Yes.
Requirement for fulfillment for me is to make an impact in a way that I feel like is bringing others to inquire deeper into the nature of things, to either try to understand reality on a greater level or reach a state of harmony with reality on a greater level. And how can I balance those,
Yes. Okay. I'm excited to unpack this a bit. So, okay, you're on this mission. You'd like to change people's perception so that they relate to themselves and the world around them in different ways, right? That you see as beneficial for the beings and the things on this planet. Do you think that's a good thing?
Do I think it's a good thing? What do you mean by good in this situation?
Yeah, is it good? Because what I think I hear you saying is that your desire for money is justified because you're doing a good thing.
I don't think it's a good thing. I think it's a thing because I don't really see it in good or bad. It just feels like something that I would enjoy doing, and something that I'll enjoy it, but I also find that it's something that feels, I don't know. Here's the nuance here, because this is very nuanced. I think you take good and you say worth it. It's something that's worth it, because it's like, why is life worth living? That you come to that question,
right?
And to me, the joy of helping other people in a way where really it comes back to this word of love.
Yes,
we find our way back to that in many different ways, and we can do that through irony. We can do that through comedy, because I'm sure, whenever people are watching this, I'm going to do hundreds of skits, and I'm going to be known more for skits because I just feel it. You know, I did that
can
first
feel
one.
that from you.
Right. I did the first one and I'm like, oh shit, this is it. Right. So I know that people are going to see me for that going forward. And I think the taking reality less serious gets us out of, and I think there's different levels of ego. And for my interpretation of that, I would look at the work of Dr. David Hawkins and his levels of consciousness and the work he did. And you can see that he's just basically saying that there's different levels of frequency and that these frequencies we can call emotions. And so when you're in a more of a state of unity or love or peace, or even, I think humor in itself is very close. And so when you're there, you're going to look at the world differently in the sense that it might not seem as serious, but then that when you take that seriousness away, it can be beneficial at some points, but it can also not be beneficial at some points because the whole world is different. And so I'm not saying it would be good for everyone to even look at it the way that I do. And I don't want everyone to look at the world the same way that I do. But all I know is that this has helped me and it seems to help other people as well. And they tell me that it does. So it's like, well, I just want to spread more of that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that's a great answer. The way that what I used to really want to be true is that like that love mattered, that there was something that I could find in physics or cosmology that would let me know that love spoke to some kind of absolute truth. Because if I could find that love was the absolute truth, then that would justify me having the experience of life that I wanted to have. Okay, I want to impact people, I want to help people, but so I want to impact people, I want to help people, I want to be at scale doing that. If I know that love is absolute truth, well, I didn't choose that. I'm just doing this thing that's true, right? I'm healing the planet because when more people are operating more at a frequency of love, then that's something that's aligned with absolute truth, right? I really wanted that to be true. And even taking like concepts of singularity, or like take that to this really far place, would be like, okay, well, if humans are spending most of their time operating at a frequency of love, and then like somehow we are inventing technology so that every particle in the universe becomes a conscious entity, then those particles could choose to be operating at a frequency of love, and then the entire universe becomes love. And like, that's where I wanted it to be that justified, right? The place where I'm at now is like, because I wanted love to be a good thing. The place where I'm at now, and what I hear you saying is that we can't know that this work matters because love is better or worse than anything else. You can only know that this work matters because it's the most fulfilling to you. And if you want to have an experience of fulfillment and joy, and if you want to laugh and you want to amplify that experience for yourself as much as possible, then it makes sense to do exactly what you're doing. You know what I'm saying? And to me, I don't think that there's anything beyond that we can know with certainty.
That's it.
Right? Like
that's it. That's all you can really know, is that it feels good. I always say, is there a balance in my life of enjoyment and fulfillment? Because if you just have pure enjoyment, it's just pleasure,
Right.
and then you get lost in pleasure. But how can you balance enjoyment, fulfillment, to the sense of I feel fulfilled, but I'm also enjoying it? But it's not always going to be enjoyable in the way that you think it is.
Right.
Like, for example, a really easy example would be meditation. If someone's meditating, it might be enjoyable one day, might feel fulfilling, but then the next day, it's not going to feel enjoyable that day always. But that's the thing that we find, is that there's so many things in life that are enjoyable, but this is where you look at neuroscience and they say short-term gratification and long-term, and the dopamine and all that. You can look at it like that from a scientific perspective, but very simply to me, it's like, I can just enjoy things in a long-term way that my mind doesn't want to enjoy at that moment or doesn't want to do. But there's some joy in that. There's some enjoyment in that, but it's a different way. And I think a lot of people who get to high levels of whether it's money or whether it's consciousness or whether it's math or physics or really any endeavor that takes a level of expertise, most people know that it doesn't take, okay, let's say this in a different way. Most people know that it is not something that you will enjoy every day.
Yep.
In the way that it's pleasurable. But there's an underlying joy of pushing through even when your mind doesn't want to. And that right there is the sauce.
That's
I
the
feel
sauce.
like it's the sauce of life, you know?
Yep.
Because sometimes it is enjoyable and we can enjoy it. But when we aren't craving that pleasure or craving wanting to do it, but we still do it. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
There's a nuance there.
Yeah. The way that my mentor, my coach, business partner, and friend, Julian, this guy's like so next level. I'm really lucky to have him in my life. The way that he describes it is, or the way that he'll explain it is like, are you choosing to invite this discomfort in because you know this discomfort is part of your bigger story, right? That's the discomfort of like studying or doing something scary because it's unfamiliar, but you know you have to do this thing because it's part of this big story that you have in your mind of the experience of life that you want to be living. So are you going to invite that discomfort in, or are you going to think that that discomfort is a sign that you should stop doing it?
Yeah, man. Last night, the last episode I just put out, I was having trouble with thumbnails and it took me a really long time to get everything uploaded. I ended up uploading the podcast yesterday was Friday, right? At like 5, 6 o'clock. And it's like, most people don't do that. It's like very scheduled. Like, it's got to be at this time. And, there's part of me that didn't want to do it, didn't want to work on it. But I knew that there would be a joy in doing it, even when my mind didn't want to do it. And I could have waited. I could have put it off and said, oh, it's too late, But there's something about pushing through. And I think a lot of people, even in spiritual community, will get lost in thinking, well, if something goes wrong when I'm doing something hard, it's a sign I shouldn't do it.
Yes.
Which I think is complete bullshit, to be honest with you. There's so many times in my life where I don't want to do things, and it's not a sign that it's going bad, but it's a sign that I'm progressing through, and that's because I think that relates back to like the way that we perceive angel numbers or these synchronicities. And we think that negative synchronicities work the same way as positive. And I think there are signs and there are feelings that are visceral within our body, but just because something isn't working the first time or there's struggles with it, I've sat up so many nights editing podcasts or making videos and my mind was like, I'm on the 15th take. And it's like, there are some people that take the perspective, if it takes a while, there's too much resistance, you shouldn't be doing it. Yeah. But I also think there's another level of persevering through it. And it really depends on, again, what do you want to experience more? Sometimes it might be true, but I think this is the point I'm making. There's not an overarching rule of resistance means you shouldn't be doing it.
Right. It's a could be. Like, you spending 6 hours trying to get this thing right, like that could be the right thing. It could be the right thing to step away. Like you can't know how do you what happens when you're in the zone? And what I'm getting from you is that you'll find yourself in places where like, you're not stopping, you're getting it done. Right. Are you blacked out and like not thinking and totally focused on this thing? Or are you having to encourage yourself to keep going?
I think it's nuanced. I think there's different situations. Oh, hold on. Hold that question. Okay. Now, what were we talking about again?
The like how do you black out when you're leaning into discomfort? Or are you having to consciously encourage and motivate yourself?
Okay, so sometimes I do have to, like, okay, we gotta get it together. And other times it just comes out perfectly. Like the skit I did, that was first take.
Mm-hmm.
And I like never, a lot of time, well, not never, but it's very rare in the old style that I was doing that I would get first take
Mm-hmm.
and just have no mistakes. But that one, it was just, it flowed. And
Yeah.
I think it's important to recognize that that does happen and that's it's great.
Yeah.
But then there's nothing wrong with the other way of doing it, or that, like, I know when I went out and I did the Are the Chakras Real video, that shit took takes. Like, I was out there, I was sweating. I was in the middle of, I was in Taos, New Mexico, in the middle of mountains. And yeah, bro, it took some encouragement. Like,
Yeah.
I had to really just sit with myself and say, we're doing this.
Uh-huh.
And it became this concept in my mind where at first, when I started to make videos, there was an option to quit. But when you put in so much effort to make something happen, like I almost find when I put more on the line, the better it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I'm out in the middle of the mountains and I'm recording this episode, there's no shot that I'm not doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Versus sometimes when I'm just at home and it's just me, I can just quit and do something else and I have access. But the more I put myself in unfamiliar environments and the more I put into the production of it, in that sense, a lot of the times that'll translate to this is getting done because I'm already, I'm already doing this.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
What about for you though?
So it's pretty similar. Like for last 2 nights ago, I decided to. So I'm kind of playing with a new model where if a video goes viral, what I'd like to start doing is create a workshop that dives deeper into whatever that video is. So last week I did this video, why are you so self-aware and so stuck? Got almost 1 million views on TikTok, which for me is viral.
Yeah.
And so 2 nights ago, just had this, I was like, I'm going to make a workshop for it. And probably spent 5 hours doing everything. And it was unconscious. I blacked out and nothing could have gotten in my way. And I was like, at the end of the night, I was depleted. I didn't feel good. I'm like, but I wasn't motivating myself and encouraging myself. It was just happening and it had to happen. But then also other times I'm like, I need to do this. It's the right thing. I need to do this. So I guess it's similar to you. It's both.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. I'm really curious to hear what you think about this. So, it seems like a habit of the universe is to distribute things in a bell curve,
Mm-hmm.
So I am like, for you, with what you're doing, how you see the world, your work ethic, your drive, like your creativity, you're probably closer to one of those ends on a bell curve, right? In terms of like, it's not common for a person to be doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Why is that? Like, is there something where there's just a balance to civilization or culture or human consciousness where like some people are just at the ends doing things that are a little bit more extraordinary? Like, why are you based on your understanding of consciousness and who we are?
Let's talk about my brother.
Okay.
It's a good way to answer this question. My brother is very smart.
Mm.
He's incredible, and I love him very much. He has always been someone who just, not always, but since we've grown up, he's 2 years older than me.
Mm.
So he was always my older brother. And I remember that there was a time period when I started to get into this. And I was just like, dude, look at this world. Look what's happening. And he didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Very smart guy.
Mm.
Nothing to do with his intelligence.
Mm.
And now I completely let go. I didn't talk to him about anything. And I remember there's a time period, I think all of us go through this, where we're like, we want the people in our family to understand.
Yeah.
And we try to convince them or talk to them about but it just, a lot of times, I don't know if that's what happened to you or if that's happened to you, but even if it's not family, just friends.
Mm-hmm.
And it really made me wonder, like, why can I see this, but he can't?
Mm-hmm.
And is there something within his brain? Is that a neuropsychological thing? Because we experience a very similar life.
Mm-hmm.
But then, here's a kicker.
Mhm.
About 6 months ago, he started listening to a podcast. Not mine, but another person's podcast. They do like, I don't know the name of it off the top of my head, or else I would shout them out.
Mhm.
But they do true crime, but they also do like kind of edgy what's happening in the world, but like from a financial standpoint, and
Mhm.
also from like like just case studies on people. Like, it really doesn't matter what they do, but the point is that it very much started to touch the outer boundaries of what I talk about, and then he started to ask me questions like, what's this about? This is interesting. Like, you've been talking about this the whole time, and now he's like starting to get to the point where he really understands what I'm saying.
Mm.
And so that makes me wonder.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Now, what you're saying is like he's a very smart person.
Yeah.
But in terms of seeing the world in this way, like maybe one way of describing it is like consciousness is fundamental, and all of this is an expression of consciousness. And here's the opportunity as a result of that. Like,
Yeah.
he wasn't seeing it in that way. It wasn't clicking for him in the way that it was obvious for you.
Yeah.
Okay. I got what you're saying.
And it really started to become apparent. And then I think this is a good example because it's not like he wasn't smart. It's not like he wasn't able to think. He just wasn't able to see it. And then that asks the question, why couldn't he see it? What took him so long? Why can all these other people not see it? And I'm not saying I have the ultimate truth, but just certain aspects of reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so why do to get back to the question of what you're asking, why do I do what I do? There's something to do with, I think at the deepest, or one of the deepest level I can realize, there's something to do with what we believe is valuable enough and what's worth doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what fundamentally drives us is beliefs, but it also beliefs come down to the value of that belief.
Mm-hmm.
That's like those two things go really hand in hand. Because I can believe something, but it doesn't have not that much value for me. And that's really hard to understand. But let's say this in a different way. When I decided to stop live streaming video games, because that's what I did for a while, I did so because I felt like it wasn't something that provided me that fulfillment. It did provide me the entertainment, and I enjoyed entertaining people in this, and I was successful at it. And I wasn't ultra successful or anything like that, but I had a decent amount. And I could have kept doing it, and I probably could have succeeded at it. But then there's something within my experience of life where I felt like, well, I want to do something that, what does it come back to? Matters. And I felt like if I'm just talking about things and entertaining people, I used to think about how, well, 100 years from now, nobody really gonna care who entertained them. They're gonna be great entertainers. We might remember people like Eddie Murphy or, people that really make us laugh. Maybe like, I can't remember his name, but he is one of the best. Robin Williams. People like that. Like, they're gonna be remembered for how entertaining they were. Even Jim Carrey for me, And I really thought about pursuing that, but then I thought, well, what kind of impact are they making, and where do I want to? This is actually very personal for me because at the beginning, it was about I thought entertainment would be valuable enough to pursue a path of. But then I realized, well, I want to help people in this conscious kind of way as well. So then I actually did the complete opposite. I became like this teacher figure who teaches people how to do stuff, and I completely rejected entertainment. But now I'm coming full circle.
Yeah.
Where I realized entertainment is in itself very valuable. So that was like my journey with why I chose to do what I do, because it's like I always knew that that I wanted to do something that on a high level. I don't know if that right there is a whole thing. Is that really the answer to your question? Do some people want to do things on a high level and some don't? Because there's people even in my personal life that don't care about that. They just want to live a happy life, but there's something within me. There's an inclination to want to do something on a massive scale.
Yes.
Maybe that even comes down to human design. I don't know if you know about human design, but I'm a manifesting generator, and have that energy to impact in a certain way. And maybe maybe you are correct in it, to just ponder what if people's, you could even think about it like this. Maybe it's not even just the people, like the personality, because in human design there's a personality crystal and then there's also a design crystal. What if there's a certain amount of design crystals that people incarnate and there's a certain amount of bodies that are designed to have a certain amount of impact,
Right.
and it's not that the person is better or worse, but maybe it's just
distributed as a bell curve. Like there are just a certain because
Shit.
right, it's so crazy because some people, you know, when we're talking about impact on a higher level, like what we mean is at scale. Right.
That's all I'm saying. It's not better or worse.
Right. It's just at scale, more people, more things. Right.
Yeah.
Not better or worse, but like some people, for me, because I feel similarly, like there's just something in me that I don't feel safe unless I'm doing it on a high scale. I'm like, so a lot of my drive in the beginning, like early 20s, late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, was like terrified of failing to meet that scale. But I like need it. I don't know what that is. I have no idea what that is or why that's there, but I hear you saying something similar, like, because you could just see the world this way. You could see the world this way and like want to entertain and want to provide value and like work at your local comedy club and film nothing and put nothing out.
Yeah.
You know?
And people do that.
And that also sounds amazing. I mean, there's some things about that are really attractive to me. But for some reason, what I hear in you is you have this like deep drive to be doing this at scale. And I just find myself curious about that all the time. Like,
what do you think, though? Do you think that that's something that comes with the body, or you think it's something that is a soul? Because people will say it's a soul thing. People might even say it's a starseed thing. You know, it's just is there something?
The only way that I can make sense of it is that the universe really seems to enjoy the bell curve. It just seems to enjoy that dynamic and that pattern. And I don't know for what purpose. I don't know, because like if you were to say that love is the absolute truth and we're moving in the direction of creating a singularity where every particle is consciously operating at the frequency of love, then you could be like, well, the bell distribution makes sense because like that's like the way that's the most sustainable way that consciousness can transform, something like that. But like I don't know if there is an end goal to it. It seems like the universe just likes the bell curve.
You want to know what I think it is?
Yeah.
I think it's something to do with there start to be, okay, let's just throw this out there. What if, this is what's coming to me. What if people have specific scales because they've reached a certain point in their evolution? Let's say there is a soul. Because a lot of, you have Hinduism is all about that life, right? And Buddhism is, but in a different way because they have no self and storehouse. Well, aggregate consciousness, that's a different conversation. It doesn't matter. The point is that there's a large percentage, a decent percentage of the world that believes there's a soul. If we take that perspective, what if the people who are doing more at scale have taken more incarnations and they've reached that point? It's like maybe there's people, and I'm not saying that everyone is in the audience, but maybe the people that are doing it on a higher scale are people who have done it more times. And maybe there are people, but
fewer,
yeah, or they've chosen the villain archetype.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, please say more about that.
So maybe there's people that specifically choose to be the villain. And to be the bad people, or maybe to be the Elon Musk anti-hero,
right,
who you don't know if they're good or bad.
Right.
And maybe it's not everyone is choosing to be good, but maybe there's certain people that choose to be bad. Just like if I'm playing, let's say, a game by Dead by Daylight, I played it a couple times. I haven't played it very much, a couple of years back. And in the game, there's one villain, and you can choose any like movie hero. Like you can choose Freddy Krueger, and then there's 4 people that are trying to escape. And if you think about it from a game perspective, maybe there's a person who chooses to be the Freddy Krueger of Earth.
Right.
And then the other people are choosing to be, not necessarily escape, but choose to be the one that fight against them. It's the archetypical story. Maybe the galactic mind has chosen to experience heroes versus villains in this way.
I can't help but just like on repeat over in my head, why? And I know that we'll never answer that question. It seems to be that way.
But
it
why?
Is, but why?
But why is it that way? Maybe it's just something that's fun.
It's fun. It is fun.
And it's maybe fun can be something that is subjective. So let's use a different term and say it can be fun for some people, but it can be exhilarating compared to what else? This is when people ask me, what is the ultimate point of all of this? An answer I often give is, what else is there to do?
Yeah.
Do you ever think about that?
Yeah.
If we aren't doing this, there might be other versions of this in an infinite multiverse, but maybe this exists just because it's a game and it's better than not playing the game. Like, let's imagine that we do, a lot of mystical texts will say there's some sort of heaven. There's a place where we can go, whether we go there once, whether we have one life, it's a different conversation. But maybe there is a heaven of some sort. What if in that heaven, there is no disharmony? Then what is there to do? Are you going to get bored of harmony eventually?
Right. And I think so if we follow that line where every particle in the universe has consciously chosen to operate at a frequency of love, like that might be heaven. That also sounds like the end of the universe, and then it starts up again. If that were to happen.
If there's an agenda. Yeah.
Right.
Is there a cycle? It just be like saying that's the end of the game. Does the game go out and come in? Like the Vedas, one of the things from the Vedas is they like say what they're pondering this question. The Vedas is an ancient Vedic text from thousands and thousands of years ago, and they basically answer this question by saying the one became two for the joy of becoming one again, and that's the reason why.
Yep.
So you could say it's joy.
Yeah.
You could say it's for the exhilaration, for the interestingness. Is that a word?
Right. That makes sense to me. You know, like I think that's one of those things where I'm not going to there have been times in my life where I would convince myself that that's true. The reason is because one becomes two and then two becomes one. I don't want to be in the place where like I need that to be true, though that does make a lot of sense to me, right? It could be that.
That's what I meant too.
It could be that. And that does make a lot of sense, right?
But you're right. We're never going to know.
We're never going to know.
And that's okay.
Yeah. Then so if we're never going to know, then to me, all that matters. When I think about what matters, I think about what exists right now and what is the information that I'm exchanging with my environment. What's my experience right now and what is my exchange with my environment? So mentor, business partner, coach, friend, Julian, will say that the only thing that matters is between people. And he said that to me a couple years ago and I got it, but I was like, but it's not just people. And he kind of he'll like play these little tricks with me where he'll not say a complete thing and I'll have to like think about it for a while and all that. It's really fun. He does the jester archetype.
All right,
really
let me, I got to talk to this guy.
He's fantastic.
Let me know if he wants to come on. We got to talk to him.
He is so next level.
Cool.
So, the only thing that matters is between people. And finally, maybe 2 months ago, I was like, Julian, you said this thing to me. I've been thinking about it just about every day since you said it. And I was like, but it's not just people. The only thing that matters is between all things. Because like, if I'm sitting alone in this room and I see this table and I'm conditioned to think that this table is ugly, and that creates an experience of like anger for me, let's say, then I'm exchanging that information with the table and it's creating this experience of anger, right? If I'd like to have an experience of peacefulness or groundedness, whatever, I might choose to see it a different way. So Julian is like, yeah, that's right. I only say the only thing that matters is between people because most people are just thinking about people. But the only thing that matters is what we're exchanging with the environment around us and the mental construction of our environment, you know? So like all of those questions of like, why does the universe distribute this way? Why, like I still want to be asking those questions. And I also have learned that like the only way to ground myself is to ask myself, what is my experience here? What am I exchanging with the things around me, and what do I want to be exchanging? That's it. That's where I've gone with those questions.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good place to go.
Elon Musk. I'm curious what you think about this. So one of the things that he has spoken about, which I really like, is that he wanted to create an electric car industry. And the only way to create, or the way to create an electric car industry was to shift culture. He saw that like the cultural shift would be the thing that makes the market. So he produced that first Tesla, like super sports car, because it was sexy. And he knew that sexy and luxurious and expensive would create the cultural shift. And once the cultural shift happened, then he could introduce the mid-tier price car. So that, because he had already created the market.
Welcome to my life.
Oh, tell me more.
That's what I do.
Uh-huh.
I feel like that's what a big thing of what I'm doing is.
Yeah.
Universe of game is sexy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you say life's a game and you have simulation and you talk about that, I started to notice a trend of people are like really interested in this topic. And people really separated simulation theory from a lot of these spiritual concepts. And I'm like, how can we do this? How can we make this an interesting thing? Because the problem is people don't think spiritual, these concepts of these ancient texts, or even studying ancient civilizations, they don't see the practicality of it. And I started to see the value in entertainment and making it something entertaining versus just another book or another teaching about love that is this or that's like very bland. So many people spend so much time there, and I did, but it's like people don't want to just hear about love. If they did, I'm pretty sure our world would look very differently right now, because people know love is the answer. They think that, well, actually, let's say this. They know that love is the answer. Like, okay, I'm going to take that back.
I have a good way of saying it.
Go ahead.
People know that love is an answer that they might prefer.
Or that may work, but it doesn't seem worth it. You know what I'm saying?
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. If enough people thought love was worth it, then our world would be very loving right now. But people don't see love as the answer.
Okay, right. Okay, I see what you're saying. So we haven't yet incentivized love.
There's no tangible value to loving others, but that's an ultimate philosophical debate on whether that'll ever never happen. You know, this is actually a great question that I've been pondering, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is there ever going to be a world that's harmonious on Earth, do you think? Or is it designed? This is something I've been contemplating. Is Earth designed to be a place of conflict for growth, for karmic growth, or if you want to put karma in there, you can, or just a place that it's almost like, is Earth going to stay this way because it's designed to be this back and forth?
Right.
What do you think?
That's a great question. So I haven't thought about this thought in a while, but what I used to think, so this is sort of like an artifact coming up. What I used to think is that if life were perfect, if the universe had figured out how to make life perfect, or to make it, and I guess what we mean by is being in a state of harmony for an infinite amount of time. That's
perfect.
Maybe that's what we say perfect is.
Sure.
If the universe had figured that out, then there would be no need to protect life. Where there would be no bodies, nothing would exist, because there's nothing. It's already perfect, right? So I see physical existence as like an expression of the fundamental imperfection of life or consciousness, right? And again, that's a thought that I had probably like 10 years ago, and I haven't thought about it for a few years. And as I'm saying it, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense, right? That makes sense as some kind of explanation. And if things were in perfect harmony, then everything would disappear, right?
Yeah.
Now, for me, the place where I'm at now is what I do spend my time thinking about is, what's the world that I would like to contribute to creating? What's the vision that I have of what I think would be a great experience, right? That is what I think about. And I don't think that is perfect harmony, because perfect harmony, like, I get what would perfect harmony, what would perfect harmony look like? Does that mean that there's no pain ever? Like, does that mean that animals aren't eating each other?
That's a really interesting concept, because it looks like our world is based on the transformation of energy,
Mm,
like animals eating each other
yeah,
and consuming in
right,
that way, consuming to gain the energy. We eat,
right,
animals eat. Does that mean that we can't eat plants anymore? Even,
right,
are plants conscious? If we
right,
perfect world,
r-
do we figure out that they are conscious?
right, right,
And then you have to ask the question: is death imperfect?
right. Does death indicate imperfection?
Right.
Right? Or does pain indicate imperfection?
Or suffering
Or suffer?
of any
Well,
kind?
I'm thinking about animal pain, and then I'm thinking about human pain plus suffering.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The consciously aware of not wanting that to happen, which I'm not sure that animals have that experience, non-human animals. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So does death imply imperfection?
Right.
I don't know.
Why it's hard to define perfection in itself.
Right. I really like this way of seeing it. A friend of mine said this to me in these words probably a year ago. And I think that this comes from from a Buddhist perspective that he picked up somewhere, which is that everything is absolutely perfect as it is, and if we want, we can make it even better. That really lands with me.
Mm.
I like the way of seeing this as what this experience is right now is exactly as it should be and could not be any other way than what it is. It's the perfect expression of all of the inputs, right? Now, once we take a look at that perfect expression of the inputs, we can say, what do we like? What do we not like? What do we like? Okay, what things can we do? What are we doing that seems to produce what we like, and how can we do more of those things? What do we not like? What would we prefer to have instead? And what makes sense to transform what we don't like into what we do like? That's the lens that I'm currently using to see the world.
And how's that working out for you?
Really empowering.
Good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's empowering and it's motivating. It's empowering and it's motivating, and it steps me out of the space of seeing things as good or bad. And I think that if we are, so if seeing things as bad on the surface is for the purpose of creating something else, right? If I see this thing as bad and I punish it, it's because I want to produce a different result. But seeing things as bad is one way of producing different results, but I don't think it's the fastest, most effective way of producing
What do you
different
think that is?
results. I think it's because when I see things as bad, then I'm generally not having the experience that I want to have, right? So if I want to produce different results, then those different results are because I want to feel a different way. Well, how can I be in the presence of this thing that I might consider bad and still feel the way that I want to, and then transform that thing into what I would like it to be instead, right? So like murder, for instance, you take like someone who murders someone. I think that if there's a lot of murder in a particular community, well, what seems likely to produce more murder is seeing that community as bad, right? What seems likely to produce a different result of murder rates decreasing is to be really loving and be invested in creating a different result. That making sense?
Yeah.
So I'm looking at love as something that's like the utility of it. Really, it's like if I want to produce something different, love seems to be the most effective, most efficient tool that I have available to me to produce something else. And why do I want to produce something else? Well, I can't say that this thing is better or worse than anything else, but I can know that I'm pretty clear that I would prefer it to be this way. I would prefer for this neighborhood to decrease the amount of gun violence they're experiencing by 90%, you know? And so then it's my responsibility to create that if I really care about that.
It is, yeah. And so I think there's a really subtle nuance in the way that you worded that. Saying prefer versus want. I think these two words in the English language are very different,
Mm,
even though there are some similarities, but there's a lot of difference in them to me. Because preference, if you use that word, there's some relaxedness about not having it to be that way. Because when a lot of times when I hear people say want, it's because they really don't want the way it is.
mm-hmm.
And I think the murder example is extreme for this context. So
Yep.
let's take a different context. Let's just say like if you wanted to live a certain type of life,
Mm-hmm.
you know, let's say that you wanted to live a life where I'll use a personal example. I was in the tent and this was actually a tough time in my life. I wanted to start living out of Airbnbs and I would definitely prefer to do that. And we did that at times.
Mm,
And there was something about finding a balance, and I don't know if I did it that well, but I know that I learned a lot from it. And I think that's important to just have that humility
mm-hmm.
to say, hey, I didn't do it that well at that point in my life. But, and I remember, and I'm saying that because I remember suffering a lot because I really didn't want to live out of the tent in certain times when it was really cold outside or it was super windy and I couldn't make any videos or things, but there were also good things about it too. But to say that it's like I prefer changing my life to living at Airbnbs versus I want to, I think preference, the sweet spot of life where I want to get, and again, I'm not always there, is
Mm-hmm.
I can prefer, like, I would prefer to live out of a truck and camper right now
Mm-hmm.
to bring it to present day,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not. And if I say I prefer, there's a nuance to saying, well, I'm okay if I don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that's just kind of the direction I want to go. And it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of more relaxed than saying want, because a lot of times want implies that we really don't have it or we don't. And not having it implies that we're suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And I just see that, not that it's a bad word, but I just see that over and over from the way that people use that
Yeah.
word. I don't know if you see that pattern.
Yep. I'm really glad that you caught me saying preference. That saying preference has been an intentional language change over the last couple of
Same.
years. And yeah, like inserting preferences into my life has been game changing for me. Really interesting thing about preferences, I find that a lot. This happens in my one-on-one sessions a lot. People who are sort of like are leaning into spirituality, embarking on the spiritual path, interpret spirituality to mean that they're not supposed to have preferences. They're supposed to be okay with everything as it is. They're not supposed to prefer it to be other ways, right? And I think that it's really beautiful in the sense that, like you're speaking about, it's about being fully satisfied while also not yet being satisfied, right? You're fully set, right? You know what I mean? You're fully satisfied here because you know how to create the experience that you would like to have here. And also you have this thing in your mind of what you would prefer to be experienced. It's an amplification of your satisfaction, you know, waves moving outwards. And so that to me is the most accountable, most effective approach to creating our experience of life, because I guess just what you said, it's like it's this ownership that I have everything that I want right now, and also I'd like to experience these other things too.
It's kind of like a paradox.
Yeah.
It's like I have everything I want. Let's dissect that too. For me, it's more I have everything that I need in this moment. I'm okay with this moment, but eventually I'd prefer to experience these things.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important to say about what you said about the spiritual disassociation from preferences. That right there needs to be said way more often.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Because so many people think that in order to be spiritual, you're just have no preferences, chilling on a hill, and that's the only way. And then you can't either make money, you can't have um, relationships. Like even I know people that will think like, well, I just want to reach this level of enlightenment, and then
Mhm.
I can't have any relationships because
Mhm.
that's not a part of the path and things like that. I just want to say I talked to 5D about this, and I agree with him that he's a Dzogchen yogi, which is a non-dual tradition. And so that's his path. That's what he's chosen.
Mhm.
And the reason why I'm referencing this is because I think that's one way. Yes. But I think what we're saying here is that we're opening up to there's many ways to live with an awareness of infinity or
Mhm.
whatever it is, this thing that we're trying to grasp. And I think what's really going to help us here is to go back to what you said when you're saying in your one-on-ones and when people embark on the spiritual path. What is that?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Robert Grant said that too. He's like, when you embark on the spiritual path, and I'm like, well, what is
Yeah.
this? That's what I really want to explore. Well, like, what's your perspective? And there's no right or wrong, but I'm just curious.
Fantastic question. So, okay, I'm so glad that you asked. I think that the spiritual path for my sense is that it's the last like 30, 20 years has been about awakened consciousness, waking up to this idea that most of what we experience in our life is happening by accident, by subconscious choice, and we have the opportunity to make conscious choices about how things are. I think that is what waking up consciousness is, which I like that. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I also think that in the paradigm of waking up consciousness is the rejection of all the other things, like rejection of the ego, rejection of like desiring sex or all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I'm seeing as what's happening now, what I'd actually like to be part of creating is this idea of creator consciousness. So what I would ask is like for spirituality, so for the spiritual like persona, for the spiritual identity, right? What result are you looking to produce? What result are you looking to produce, right? And most people would say like peace. This thing is about experiencing peace. And here are all these prescriptions for experiencing peace. Reject the ego. If I'm desiring things, then I'm not experiencing peace, all that kind of thing, right? So the stated result is to experience more peace. But everyone who I find who is in a place where they think they're not supposed to have preferences is not experiencing peace. Their life is filled with frustration and not feeling as empowered as they might like to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not filled, but let's say there's there's more frustration than they would like because they think they're supposed to be this other thing, but they're not that other thing. They do actually desire certain things, but they're judging themselves for desiring things because they think that a desire means that they're not a spiritual person and they're supposed to be a spiritual person. So it's like awareness in all these other places other than what am I experiencing and are the things that I'm doing working to create the experience I want. What I've found is that the preference thing, the honoring of the preferences and stepping into a space of taking the vision we have of our preferences and turning that vision into reality, like an act of creation, that to me is what I find to be the thing that creates the fulfillment and the peace and the satisfaction that like the awakened consciousness was trying to get at.
Yeah. That's it, man. That's it. That's a beautiful way to put it. And I think you're really starting to get at the root of what I feel like many people are realizing, that you can still be aware. And I'd like to put this in a frame of you're moving from the victim to the creator.
Mhm.
And maybe that is part of many communities. That's part of even the mindset community. Um, but they might take it to an extreme with extreme action, like David Goggins or people like that, for
Mhm.
example, if you know who that is.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're doing here is we're saying, well, it's not just all about what we can call masculine energy, if you want to put it in masculine, feminine terms. And it could also be about relaxing
Mhm.
and finding a mixture of both. Because I think that if you're too, what we're talking about is being so relaxed that you have no preferences.
Yes.
But what we're saying is you bring it back to kind of that center point. It's like, I have preferences, but I'm still in a general baseline sense relaxed.
Mhm.
But I'm still have a level of, I don't know if control is right, because do we really have control? But we are doing, to bring it all the way back around, we're doing what we can with the information in our exchange of that information within our environment. And
Yeah.
that's all we could do.
That's it. That's it. And
Yeah.
so I think that what I'm hearing in there is like, it's not, actually just did a poll this morning. I said a quote. I was like, something like all there is creation, and the only thing that matters is what you create. I was just curious about how people would respond to that and how they see that. So I did like, yes, no, that's blasphemy, and creation is one thing, but there are also other things. And then I asked like, okay, so if creation is one thing and there are also other things, what else is there? And people said things like grief, love, emotions. So it was very interesting to me to see that people see creation and emotional experience as separate things, right? Where to me, I I don't see those things as separate. What I do see is that what we get to do is create a life where we have access to the emotions that we'd prefer to experience, right? So we can create our environments in such a way that those emotions are built into our environment, or our environment invites in those emotions, right? And makes it more likely that we can experience them. Now, if what I want to experience is love and groundedness and joy and peace, and what I'm doing is building, 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 and never resting, well, then I'm not holding myself accountable to actually getting what I want to have, which are those feelings. If I'm depleting myself, or if I'm spiritually bypassing and like being positive when actually I feel sad, then I'm not doing the thing that I'm setting out to do. You know what I'm saying? So to me, if when we make it about like, what are the feelings I want to have in my life, fulfillment, satisfaction, love, groundedness, and what seems most likely to produce those feelings, what can I create to invite those feelings in? That we set ourselves up to be able to really hold ourselves accountable to experiencing those things as much as possible. If we actually would like to hold ourselves accountable to it, we could also take the option of pretending we're feeling certain things when we're not, but it sets us up to hold ourselves accountable.
Yeah. And to hit on a topic that you brought up there, because I'm really curious as to what you think too on that, is spiritual bypassing. How do you think people spiritually bypass? You know?
How? Like, what's the mechanism
Yeah.
at play? Hmm.
I know it's
Really,
a different question,
it's a
but
great question.
yeah.
I'm really glad you asked. So, okay, I have an example of someone who, let's say they work at a place and new ownership takes over, right? And they're sad about how things used to be, but they're like, you know what? I'm going to be positive about this. I'm going to show up with a positive attitude. But then they find themselves being sad, trying to force themselves to be something that we would describe as positive, right? So that to me, so then I would ask that person, what is positive? Well, I want to feel joyful, excited, enthusiastic. Like, okay, so right now The result you want to produce is joy, enthusiasm. And what you're doing is a strategy that is, I need to back up a little bit. So
Sure.
they want to be positive, but they find themselves still not being there, right? They're not experiencing that thing.
Yeah.
So they're engaging in a strategy that is not producing the results that they want to produce. So that's what I see spiritual bypassing as. It's not bad. It's just an ineffective strategy. And so what I would ask that person to do is to find the part in themselves that's sad or that's mourning the loss of how things used to be, that's grieving, and develop a relationship with that part of themselves. Curiosity, warmth, like what is it that you lost here? How do you want things to be? What's this experience like for you? Developing a relationship with the part that's experiencing something that we would call not positive or not well-being sets you up to be able to experience what we call positive or what we call well-being. If you think about it like this, like if you're hanging out in your house right now and you have this inner child part in you that was like fearful of rejection and abandonment, and that child walks into your house right now feeling sad, and you're like, nah, bro, I'm good. Like playing video games, leave me alone. You're giving that kid more evidence that lets him know that it makes sense for him to continue to feel that way. So ignoring him is a strategy for him to feel more strongly whatever he feels, right? The strategy that actually produced the results we want is just to meet those parts with kindness and curiosity. If you're like, yo, come on in, like you grab a controller, you want to play, what's going on? What was your day like? What are you sad about? What's happening? Developing a relationship, think about like that kid's body language. He would like life would be put into his body, right? So spiritual bypassing to me is just an ineffective strategy to produce the results that we want. And the more effective strategy is to meet the parts of us that we are trying to bypass and develop relationships with those parts.
Okay, so how do you develop that relationship with that part without getting lost in it? Because what if it just wants to take over?
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's a great question. What I would say, this is why I think that like therapy and coaching is so helpful, because if you're doing that
It's
within
nuanced.
the concept of, yeah, exactly.
Of course.
If someone is helping you through that, but the thing is like, if that part wants to take over and then you say, okay, you have permission, express yourself the way that you want to, and let's see what happens, right? And then that part takes over, and then maybe you let that part take over your body language. That part, like you become that part of you, right? I mean, you know how this works. Like usually when someone has permission to do the thing that they want to do, then and they've been told that they're not allowed to do that their entire lives. Then once they get permission, a lot of the times it's like, oh, okay, well, now that I know that I can do it, I don't really need to do it anymore. You know what I'm saying? So finding the parts of ourselves that might want to take over and like giving permission to do it.
What do you think the boundary is?
Well, here's how I see this. So what we're talking about here comes in from the internal family systems framework. Have you ever heard of that? Mm-hmm. It's so good. It was created by this guy named Dick Schwartz. But when anyone creates any therapy modality, basically what's happening is that person is just doing something that a lot of other people were doing, and they were just the good business person. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So internal family systems and parts work is what it's called, is this system. What's so cool about it is that everyone that I've ever met who's a therapist or some kind of like one-on-one practitioner uses internal family systems, whether or not they know it. So it's this idea that we have multiple parts to us. We're not just one thing. We're like a head of garlic. That's how Dick Schwartz would describe it. And each of these parts of us has evolved seeing the world in a particular way. Maybe one part learned, I'm not lovable and I need to work in order to access love, something like that. Love is not just conditionally given to me.
Or I'm not worth anything.
I'm not worth anything, right? Yeah. These parts of us, they make sense of the world given our experiences and the emotional experiences they have. And then For most of us, it's our parts who are steering the ship, right? Most people have their lives controlled by the belief systems and the emotional systems of parts of themselves, right? So are these parts that are here to protect us in a certain way, right? Given how they understand the environment they involved in. And then we have our capital S self, right? The higher self. The way that IFS would describe the higher self is that it's the version of you that has infinite, immutable access to well-being. So infinite access to love, joy, kindness, curiosity, compassion, calm, all
Yeah.
those things, right?
Hmm.
The higher self, the capital S self, could be in hell and would be able to access the experience it wants in hell. So it can be stress tested all the way, right? So anytime you're not in a state of well-being, it's likely that a part of you has been activated. And that's a part that has learned to believe that whatever it's experiencing, it needs to experience, that it's its best survival strategy in order to keep you alive. It's its best strategy. So when you're not experiencing well-being, it's a really good opportunity for you to bring curiosity to yourself and start to see that a part of you has taken over, and your mind will make sense of the part. Your mind will see like who this looks like, what their body language is like, what they're wearing, and you can ask them questions and develop a relationship with them. What we want to do is learn to relate to all of our parts from the perspective of our higher self. So if the higher self has infinite access to love and calm and curiosity, the higher self doesn't need the parts to change. They can stay the same. The higher self has deep unconditional acceptance of the parts, but it's that deep unconditional acceptance that creates the environments where those parts are like, oh, I've been protecting myself because I don't think that love is available to me. And here are all the strategies I've learned in order to navigate the environment where I see love as scarce. But now I'm seeing love as this abundant, infinite resource. So I don't have to protect myself in that way. Here's what I would rather do instead. I don't want to invest my energy into being sad or to being like whatever it might be. I'd rather be playful. I'd rather do this. So you bring these parts to life when you learn to relate to them from your capital S self.
Hmm. Yeah. So you're bringing it in, and you're allowing it to be there. And at what point? I guess the more technical question I'm asking is, from a utility standpoint, is
Mhm.
there ever times in your life that you're like, it's not an optimal time to experience it? Maybe you're um, giving a speech, something comes up, and it's like inner child, and it's like
Mhm.
sometimes you might have to,
Yep.
is there times or
That's a really good question. So what I've found is that, okay, so Carl Rogers, who created this thing called person-centered therapy, which is beautiful, is in response to behaviorism in psychology. So behaviorism was all about like measuring everything because psychology has always been desperate to be seen as a legitimate science. So like, how can we measure these things? That's behaviorism. Carl Rogers came in and was like, no, we don't create change by measuring things. We create change by offering unconditional acceptance and what he calls unconditional positive regard, right? So in Carl Rogers' system of psychology, the highest level for him is pretty similar to what like Ken Wilber would say, or like many systems of human evolution.
Mhm.
The highest system for Carl Rogers is to be in a state of constant change, right? It's like the highest frequency possible of change. So I think that as a person is progressing in this evolution, learning to relate to themselves more and more from the place of the capital S self, the changes can start to happen instantaneously. So if I notice a part of me that might be scared of something, I think at this point in my process, I can immediately relate to it from my higher self, and it changes the state of that triggered part, right? In the beginning, it may take more time because you haven't yet learned how to relate to it from your higher self. So sometimes parts will, actually, not sometimes, most of the time, parts will relate with parts. So if you have a part of you that's like, I'm unlovable, I'm not worthy of love, you might have developed another part that's come in to protect that part that's like, shut the fuck up, we're getting this done, right? So that's not well-being, right? I don't know what that is, but that's not well-being most likely. So where this stuff takes time is when people are in a space where their conditioned response to their parts is to activate another part. And so that's where it's like, it's about learning, it's about practicing relating yourself from the higher self. So I would say if a person hasn't yet practiced this, then it's probably a good idea to have like a safety plan set up for something like doing a talk if they haven't yet been able to access immediately relating to themselves from their capital S self. You know what I'm saying? So like, here's the plan. If this part gets triggered, that's afraid of public speaking, here's what we're going to do. And that would probably involve some bypassing, some coping, but you would, in order to totally transform the fear of speaking, you'd want to develop a relationship with that part of you that's afraid of it in an environment where there are no harmful consequences of that part being activated.
Mm-hmm. And so you become aware of it and you develop a relationship with these parts so that's really interesting because it's like there's two parts, not just one, there's two. There's the original response that you had from your life, whatever happened at some point, which we may never know,
Yeah.
by the way, but it's just there.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And that's another
I
point
love
too.
that you say that. Yes.
Because it's so hard. I know that there's been studies done on memory that the way that we remember things are a lot of the times not even close to how they originally were. So
Most of the time, yeah.
yeah. Do you know that percentage?
I don't know the percentage,
Okay.
but
I don't remember. I was curious if you knew.
I want you to continue because if memory is a fascinating thing, but I want you to continue on the line that you were going down.
Yeah, I was just getting at that. If most of what we remember is not actually the way that it played out, it's very hard to understand a lot of times the inner child from this is what happened, but rather, I think the approach that we can take is this is what I'm experiencing now.
Yes.
And once we understand what we're experiencing now, the context of how it happened doesn't even really matter that much because we don't know if that's true. But what we know what is true is how we're experiencing life now. And that's all we can really say. So a lot of people will spend time trying to figure out, maybe even I've heard of people trying to like time travel back there to that moment and experience it again and timeline jump and these things. And I think they can have utility in some situations, but for this context, I find that not useful because where we might be trying to go might not even be the same place that actually what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're just like, hey, I'm experiencing being uncomfortable right now or anger because of this situation or this person or whatever the context of the emotion that you're feeling like you'd prefer not to experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we have that understanding, it's like, well, where it came from, okay. It's maybe it's here, maybe it's there. Could be, right? Back to could be.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, how can I tangibly say, okay, you're here. You can come in. I'll have a cup of tea with you. And then, that what I was getting into before was at what point do we usher it out or do we allow it to stay as long as it wants to? And then it comes back to this concept of maybe we can turn down the volume while still allowing it to be kind of like saying, I know that it's not the truth, but it can still be, the thought can still be there because it's like, then we get into the nuance of the implications of when does suffering actually occur?
Mm-hmm.
Does suffering occur because the thought's there or because we give value to the thought?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's so much good stuff in there. So here's a model that I think is helpful. Let's say
I'm gonna get you some.
Oh yeah, please. Let's say thank you. Let's say in a given moment you get triggered, right? Something happens that triggers some kind of conditioned fear response, right? That state, right? Going back to kind of like David Hawkins' frequency stuff, I think that the primary thing is the frequency. right? Or that maybe we could even say that the primary thing is the state of consciousness. That state of consciousness expresses itself through you in several different ways. It expresses itself in your thoughts, in the predictions that you're making about the future, in your interpretation of the past. It expresses itself physiologically in your heart rate and what chemicals your body is producing. It expresses itself in your posture, in your breathing. So I see it as the fundamental thing is this state of consciousness. And what happens is like something triggers me, which means like something comes into my awareness and I have a pre-existing relationship with that thing. And that pre-existing relationship lets me know to be in a fear state when this thing enters my field of awareness, right? That fear state expresses itself, like I was saying, thoughts, emotions, physiologically, in predictions of the future, interpretations of the past. So the most important thing is to be with what's there. Because a lot of times, like with what you're talking about with going into the past, people will bypass the way that the subconscious is trying to express itself because they think there's a right way to do it. So they think that, okay, this means I need to hug my inner child, right? It's just a way of coping and not really a way of transforming anything. What we want to do is when we're in a fear state or a state of non-well-being, let's call it, we want to pay attention to what's there in the form of the thoughts, the predictions of the future, the interpretation of the past, physiologically, what's happening. And we allow our mind to make sense of what's happening. And usually, as our mind is making sense of what's happening, it'll present us with some kind of image, right? That image is often a version of ourselves, but it could be like this black glob, right? And really there's no prescription for the process other than to be curious and kind towards whatever is being presented. So if I'm noticing myself having thoughts where I'm predicting a certain future, then what I want to do is notice those thoughts and just be curious about them. Like,
that word is important. Curious.
Yes.
You know,
it's the main thing. Because and that the curiosity is the higher self is and those are just like arbitrary words, you know what I'm saying? But what we're really talking about is accessing curiosity 100% of the time.
I was curious about the utility of the higher self. Now I was gonna get into that.
Yep, exactly. So I don't know if there's such thing as the higher self, but the theory that we're operating with is that you always have access, that any experience is available in any moment, which means that curiosity is available in any moment. And so we can just call that the higher self, but really what we're looking to do is to be curious about the experience that we're having. And if we can train ourselves to do that, then there will always be triggers, but the sooner we get to curiosity and relating to our triggers with curiosity, the sooner we get to a place where our triggers are not holding the driving wheel, not steering the ship.
Okay. I'm going to hit the bathroom.
Go.
I'm going to take a little break.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll be back in just a second. There's actually a question.
So cool.
Shout out to Grant. Grant, I hope you're enjoying editing this one, bud. You're an absolute legend.
We love you, Grant.
We love you, Grant. That's right. All right. So, yeah, we're back. And, just scaling, right? Just scaling. You don't find enough time to do everything.
Yeah.
Because there's so many, I'm trying to do skits and do my own workshops, and people want the audiobook so bad for my book.
Really? So you're going to read it?
Oh, I've been trying to do it, but I'm not saying that in like a negative sense. I'm glad people want it, but it's a lot of work to read your own book.
Yeah.
So I basically, now that I have an editor, I will now have the time to do the audio book.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And so we're kind of scaling, and I can only thank everyone who I didn't even prepare this, so this was not pre I didn't think about doing this but everyone that has bought my book, literally, that is a reason why we're able to hire Grant. So
Yes.
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's listening and watching. You're the best. And I really appreciate the support, because basically all the money that I get from all the different things that goes into like investing in this, because you asked me, first thing you asked me when I came in was this podcast tour sponsored? And I was like, no,
Yeah.
this is all just me. But
Yep.
it's me in the sense that everyone that bought the book,
Right.
I invested in this place so we had a good space to record.
Yep.
And that's basically what I do. I don't know about you, but I'm putting everything back in as much as I can, So that was one of the first things I always tell people. It's like, if you can delegate authority of certain things that other people can do, like I know Grant's going to do a great job editing this. And so if he can edit this, then I can do other things. But then I don't know about you, but I was really raised in an environment where we didn't have a lot of money. So I really had to let go of trying to save everything.
Mhm.
And so for me, it was like, right now I'm currently embracing the concept of, it's really interesting, because you said earlier, the spiritual person who said to not do these things, you have to spend a lot of money to make a lot of money. I think that can be distorted. Like I've seen groups of people like, you donate this much and then you get this much back from the universe.
Yeah.
I think that's bullshit.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. Take or leave it. But more what I'm talking about is like embracing I have to invest in an editor in order to do these other things, which will eventually lead me to get more done.
Mhm.
And getting more done, we'll be able to scale larger. And also that, but also this place, like I was like, there's a place that was cheaper, but it didn't look as good. And I'm like, but I want it to look cool.
Right.
And so it's
Right.
like, I have to balance, like, is it worth it to spend $700 extra just to get a
Right.
place that looks cooler? And it was like, it feels really good. And it not only feels good, but it's like, I'm doing it with the intent that not having a more comfortable place will allow us to have a more conducive environment
Yeah.
for a conversation that will be more in flow, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I really love it. I mean, what I'm hearing there is like, you're clear on the experience you want to have. You have a vision of what you want this podcast and your media to look like and sound like. And you're just creating that thing.
I saw this living room and I'm like, dude,
right.
It's so cool.
The only reason you, I mean, of course, like there's spending money and then not having money, but then there's also all of that mess of like, a person like me doesn't buy something like this.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like that's where I find that people, like where most of the messiness happens. That's just, that to me is operating with a hierarchy where there doesn't need to be a hierarchy. Some spiritual people will say that hierarchy is just a made up thing. I don't think that that's true. I think it's both made up and it exists. That seems like a place where we can choose to not apply hierarchy and just be like, I have a vision of what I want to create and I'm going to create it. I've found that to be the most fulfilling.
Yeah. I think there's this part where, why would you not spend it? If you have the money, why would you not spend it? But there is also a groundedness. We got to have a groundedness of like, where am I at financially?
Yeah.
Like, is it actually like, am I spending my last money just for
Right.
it to look cooler?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
You know?
So you're always like, you're tweaking the dials, like considering like the
How much am I working
experience.
with?
Yeah. And there's so much that goes into that, because there's also like your brand that you have to consider. You have to consider like the investment in this and who you're becoming. This seems like this podcast tour for you is about who you're becoming, who you're growing into.
Yeah.
And how can you represent that visually? How can you represent who you're becoming visually while also being grounded in who you currently are? It's an interesting thing.
Yeah. And I think that came up for me back when I did the Josh Trent podcast, and he has millions of listeners, and he's been doing it much longer than me. And he's kind of at that level where I'm like, okay, well, what did you do? How did you do it? I asked him during the podcast, like, what are some advice? And he was talking about how he has his own podcast studio and how he pays a lot for it, but that it's worth it to have that production value. And I kind of just took that advice from someone who, because I really try and take advice from people who are where I want to be, not just people who are just saying shit.
Good strategy.
You know what I mean? And I think a lot of people don't think about that. And I think that's something that many people would really benefit from, is really asking yourself, is the person who's telling me this information in an emotional, mental, physical, all around state.
Yes.
Maybe it doesn't have to be completely perfect,
Yes.
but are they in a state where this is something that I want to go for and emulate in my life?
I love that. You know who that makes me think of is Jordan Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
I think he is incredibly smart. I think he's incredibly smart.
Yeah.
And I also understand like I understand how some people can experience the things that he says as harmful. I see the landscape of it. But just in terms of Jordan Peterson, he does not seem like he's having fun, right? He just doesn't. And that's like
true.
It's
that's what I see too.
Right? That's what I experience. Now, I'm not totally sure what he is experiencing, but what I love about what you said, like emotionally, physically, intellectually, I can't remember all the categories, right? Mentally. So now here's how I see this. If I were to consume every single thing that Jordan Peterson says and want to embody it, if I were to take all of the advice that he has, it's likely that I would start to move in the direction of having whatever experience he's having, which doesn't seem like it's fun, right? So if I know that it's my preference to be experiencing fun pretty often, then I'm clear on what I want, which sets me up to be able to see someone like Jordan Peterson, see the results that his perspective produces, which is not fun, and be like, okay, I'm going to be selective about what I'm going to really internalize here, because if I take every single thing that he says and consume all of it as if it's truth, then I will become not fun, because that's what his perspectives produce, right? If opinions and beliefs are tools that create an experience, his create whatever experience he's having. So I just really love the way that you say that. And I think that's so true. And something that was difficult for me for a lot of years, because I knew that I wanted to be at a certain scale. So I would look at people who were at a certain scale and just blindly try and take everything, this person, without really discerning what is this person's experience, and is that really an experience that I want to have?
Yeah. And I think this is an important conversation, because this brings up the question of why is he not having fun? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then it might come down to maybe a psychological archetypes. Maybe we're looking at different archetypes.
Yeah.
And then the next question would be, well, what archetype is he playing? And it seems like it's this intellectual warrior, maybe-ish. I don't know. It's warrior in the sense that he's fighting for what he believes is right, but intellectual because it's not physical. You know what I'm saying? So it's like a combination. I don't know if there's a specific one, but that's kind of how I perceive him. And so if we're moving in the direction and we're taking that advice and we're taking it wholeheartedly, then we might become that. But this is something that I also like to relay, is there are costs to everything in some sense. You could even say from a baseline level of the cost of love is fear. Because if you say that those two, can they exist at the same time, or can they or can they not? You know, what do you think about that? I'm just curious. Do you think that they can?
Yeah, I think that the more experiences that we are able to have, okay, if your consciousness is a snow globe, right, and you have stuff in there, I think that that actually analogy doesn't work. Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
Can I tell you what I think?
Yeah, please.
While you're thinking about that, I think we think of love and fear as actually opposites, but I think that true love is the inclusion of fear, because love is closer to unity.
Beautiful.
Do you know what I'm saying?
That's it. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah. So when we think about what does it cost, fear is costing love in the sense of you haven't reached that level of inclusion of it, because you're almost rejecting it, which is why you're there.
Yes.
You know? So
Exactly.
What is Jordan Peterson rejecting? And I will reach a point where I talk to him eventually.
I can't wait till you can ask him that.
Yeah.
I would really, really love to know. I think that because sometimes a person, remember, like the way that I see the world is we're having an experience. That experience could be fun. It could be somberness, could be like whatever.
Yeah.
Most people are not consciously choosing the experience they're having. It's being chosen for them as a result of subconscious conditioning.
Or religious conditioning as a part of that.
Yep, exactly. Right. Like exactly.
Which I think that's more applicable to him.
Condition, right? Yeah. Right. Right. A persona is given to you, and there's a part of you that believes that you need to be that persona, right?
Or that's valuable in some way.
Or that just being the persona is valuable in and of itself, right?
Right.
Yeah. All like,
which is why I think that he thinks that the religious persona is valuable, which is what he's embarked upon as a part of it. It's not his whole thing.
Right.
But
Right. So I think most people aren't intentionally choosing the experience they're having, but I think he's so smart that it's likely that he's thought about it. Now, I do have a bias where I believe that if a person is really that smart, they will choose fun. Because it feels so much better.
Well, define smart though. That's the question. Because smart 20 years ago used to mean you go to college and your PhD, and therefore you are absolutely smart no matter what. And I think times are changing to what is the definition of smarter, intellectually capable,
It probably what I mean is aware. Aware is what I mean. Aware of what's happening. So right now there's a whole lot of information that's available to both of us, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't mean like scrolling. I mean sitting here right now. And we're only picking up on so much of the information that's available, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think when I say smart there, what I mean is aware of a larger percentage of the information and aware of the capacity to be able to make a choice in response to the information that's available. I think that's what I mean, right? To me, my bias is to think that if a person is more aware, the more aware a person is, the more likely it is that person will choose to have a fun experience. Now, maybe Jordan Peterson is so aware that he's playing a persona intentionally. I just watched this documentary a couple months.
Oh, that's interesting.
You know what I'm saying? Because he knows that archetype will be successful, and that's not actually who he is. He's choosing to play it like he's a WWF wrestler.
Yeah, or successful could also be analogous to it's needed. He thinks there's value in that for society.
Right.
And maybe he's trying to sacrifice to be that person because he believes being that person is what's needed.
Yeah.
But we don't know if that's the case. That's the problem with that way of thinking.
You mean we don't know if that's the case? Like
it's going to be more beneficial, or it's needed, or if that's the way he thinks.
And right, and that goes back to what do we want to create? Like I'm always thinking, what do I want to create that doesn't currently exist? You are creating this emergence of like science, spirituality, and entertainment that doesn't currently exist at the scale that you want to produce it at, right? Mm-hmm. And you're doing it with a certain energy. This like, it's fun. There's humor in it. It's also like grounded, right? So you're creating this thing that doesn't currently exist. Jordan Peterson is creating a thing that doesn't currently exist, but the spirit that he's putting into it is like, I don't even know how to describe it. I just know that it's not fun, right? So
I think courage is not fun a lot of the times.
So you think it's courage?
If we're looking at a levels of consciousness perspective, because courage is like the warrior, courage is the fighter.
Yeah.
And fighting and going against the grain by in itself with no irony or humor is not fun.
Yeah.
So when you take yourself serious and you take life very seriously and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that. It's like, it is courageous energy. It is like my best friend, Jason, we were talking about Jordan Peterson the other day, and he was saying that he sees the world through the lens of like, what are you creating and what's your experience thing as well. But he said he'd actually never thought about that with Jordan Peterson because he like reveres he appreciates Jordan Peterson so much for having the courage to say the things that my friend Jason like wants to be able to say as well. So I thought, so that really resonates, that like he's having this courageous experience, and
Yeah.
he thinks that that's the thing that's needed in order to produce the results that he wants to.
And I think that, yeah, there's also a level of like societal hate. And I think that if you are going against a certain way of thinking, which he is, there's a level of hate that you're going to get.
Mhm.
And maybe that has hardened him in the inverse way that it may. This is actually a really good point. He basically had a choice when he was teaching a certain way and then he started to get popular. Do you double down on that, or do you take yourself not as serious and you make fun of it? It's like humor makes fun of it and shows the irony and will give you truth through saying how ridiculous it is, or you can just straight go for how ridiculous it is.
Yeah. Like
You know what I'm
like
saying?
warrior energy cut to the heart of the
Yes.
ridiculous. Yeah. So you've heard him say that he made a conscious choice.
No,
about
that's what
that.
I'm speculating.
Oh, that's what you.
That's what I
okay.
feel like he might have
I
done.
think he did. He's so smart. Like
Yeah.
he knows what he's doing. Right.
It to some respect, but I think
maybe not. Yeah. Maybe not.
I think he knows what he's doing in terms of he knows what he wants to do and the change he wants to make in society. But I think what Jordan Peterson isn't aware of, and I think Robert Grant told me he's going to have him on his podcast.
Oh, that'll be fantastic.
And so I want to see that episode of those two go in hand to hand. I actually told Robert Grant, ask him about, I really want you to, it's just, we were just talking about the podcast and it was like, I'm just curious if you get the chance, like it's not serious, but what I would start to ask him would be questions like, well, where is I think in a very blunt way, the thing that with Jordan Peterson, I think he's doing a lot of amazing things. And I do think he is, but I think there's a level of the religious overtones. I want to dissect why he has such a strong inclination that is truth. I don't know if you've heard about him talk about how the Bible is like the prerequisite of truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to dissect with like and understand why you can do that. And I would get into that conversation.
Right.
Because I think that is the underlying narrative of the reason why he believes what he does, because not in every aspect, but in some of the aspects you see is very heaven and hell and judgment oriented. And we started off the conversation talking about how to let go of that.
Right.
And I think that's why there's a lot of judgment with what he does. And, you know, I have Eisen, I did a podcast with, and he just did a video about how do we need judgment? And he was saying we do need judgment, but I think really what we need is a discernment and boundaries of what it is that is going to help or hurt us. But then again, that's subjective.
That's subjective.
That's why it's a game.
Right.
You know,
because help or hurt is related to what you want to create.
And what hurts us sometimes will actually help us in the long run.
Right. That's why I don't like that story. You know, you've probably heard the thing like the farmer's son got his leg broken. And then you know what I'm talking about.
100%.
I don't like that because to me, that story is still operating with the paradigm of we define good or bad as it relates to our experience. So if the horse, whatever, then I see that as good because that does something good for me. I think that really what we want to step out of is, you know what? I've only like heard that and had vague thoughts about it and have never written it out. So I'm realizing that I don't have a fully fleshed out opinion about that.
That's okay. But it happens in real time. That's what happens when you're talking in real time.
But like, I know there's something about that I don't like.
Yeah. And so what you're referring to is this story of this horses and this guy who was supposed to go off to war. I don't know the exact story, but basically things keep happening and the dad keeps telling him it's not good or bad, it just is. And then eventually it ends up being this way or that way. Or the moral of the story is that we don't know if things are good or bad. And I understand what they're getting at. And I think it can be helpful to some people for sure to get that, hey, maybe when you decided I wanted to have a better relationship and then your girlfriend broke up with you, that isn't necessarily a bad thing because in the end, 6 months later, you might meet the person you actually want to be with.
But then what that's saying is that, oh, it's not a bad thing because a good thing happened. You know what I mean? That's what I don't like about it.
Yeah.
I like because it's saying good and bad doesn't exist because bad things could happen that produce good results and good things happen that could produce bad results.
Which is a step up from before.
It's a step up.
But it's not fully
exactly. I'm so happy we got to talk about this because now it's clear for me now. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. For me, I much prefer what's the landscape? What's the experience? What do I like? What do I not like? What are my preferences? And how might I create more of what I like and less of what I don't like? I think just that, not like, oh, this is bad and it might lead to something good later. I think it's a much more empowering perspective to have.
Yeah. And I do think it's a good way to understand that something can be beneficial for someone at a certain level of consciousness. And this is why I've said before that like even Jordan Peterson or judgment is definitely beneficial to someone who's in what we could call shame or the lowest levels, because if shame is the absence of morals. So if you have no morals or ethics, or you don't think there's any consequences for anything, or you don't find the value in those, then you're going to do extreme things. You might go around offing people serially or do these things that are heinous crimes as humans. So if you think that there's a God that's going to judge you, then you're like, okay, I might not want to do that because I might burn forever. But it doesn't mean that that's the ultimate truth. And that's why to someone who's very struggling, it can be helpful, but to someone who really wants to get to the next level of, well, what is the actual truth beyond books? We don't know. You know?
Okay. I love that.
We don't know.
I love that. I love that. Okay. So, seeing the utility of God, seeing the invention of God, right? And what it does. I love that. Love the idea of like when humans were experiencing anonymity for the first time as we were going from small tribes to like farming societies, right? That's when it seems like this idea of a God that was watching came about to control social behavior. That's kind of what you're getting at?
I mean, you could say it like that.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know when God was invented or if there is a God. And for the record, there could be. And I'm open to it. I'm not saying that there is or isn't a God. What I'm questioning is, what does the God do? And where is the God? You know?
Yeah.
And I think that can be truth in these books. And I'm not saying it's all wrong.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that what we can't do, what I feel like I don't want to do for myself personally is decide that one thing is the ultimate truth, every part of it. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah. The truth that I look to is I think the closest to the truth of reality that I can get is, what experience am I having right now? How do I feel right now? Like you were saying before about inner child stuff and going back to the past, and all there is right now. Like I operate with the perspective that I can't know with certainty that my past actually happened. Like I don't know with certainty that I didn't just plop right here on this couch operating at a certain frequency, constructing a worldview and perspectives and memories and all that allows me to continue to feel whatever I'm feeling. Right now, is that likely? Probably not.
Who knows? It could be.
I don't know that it's not.
Somebody could have been using that body yesterday, and then you just plopped into the body today, and then you have those memories implanted in the body to give you the perspective that it could be that's what happened, but you don't even know.
It could be that. It could.
Not saying that it is.
Not saying it is, but the fact that I can't know with certainty that it's not. I would like to be at least open to the idea that it could be. Right? I'm not needing it to be. So if that's the case, and all there is right now, and the closest to the truth of reality that I can get is how I feel right now, then all there is to do is to either have a preference. Do I like this experience or do I not like this experience? And things to me just get so convoluted and so unnecessarily complicated when we're like looking to an ancient text for truth, when it would just be like, oh, when I read this idea, I have this experience. Do I like that or not? Okay. If I like that, then this idea or this belief, I'm now aware that that belief is a tool that I can use in order to create this particular experience. I don't know if that tool speaks to some kind of absolute truth, but I've just seen that thing happen and I can continue to use that in the future. All is one of those things. Like that's generally a perspective that people say that like I think is an expression of being in a state of love or bliss. But when I'm not in a state of love or bliss, things don't feel like all is one. So both are true. Like all is one relative to being in a state of love or bliss. When I'm in a state of fear, things seem very separate. I seem very separated from the world, you know? And so maybe I can use the all is one perspective to access a state of love, and maybe it works or maybe it doesn't. It's just a tool.
That's why I liked the law of one for so long, because I didn't know if it was the truth, but I damn felt real good.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It felt real good in the sense of I felt harmonious.
Yeah.
I felt love. You know, understanding one of the things the law of one did well was explain, I guess after years and years later, one of the big takeaways that I still sticks with me today is that there's positive and negative in our reality in this particular third density is what they call it. But when you get to the sixth density, that you have to drop the polarity. And so the way that they put it would be, it's like a magnet. Like we're experiencing a magnet. There's positive and negative on the magnet. There is positive and negative. It really is an experience. But in the end, you're the entire magnet and you're everything that's in the magnet.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a very beneficial way to view it, because then you're not denying that, yeah, there might be things that are life-taking and we can call those evil for a sense, but really I think it's more accurate to call it negative. It's just one end of the, and then that kind of takes away, when you have the magnetism, it takes away the sense of it is good or bad. It just is positive and negative. And a lot of times when people hear positive and negative, they put the human construct of emotion of good and evil on it. But really in the end, positive and negative is not in association with necessarily good or bad unless we put it there, because really at its core, it just means there's two ends. There's a separation and there's a unity. And unity, we can call that positive and we think that's good, but it doesn't necessarily mean it is. It's just one choice that we have in this world to be positive or negative. And if we're negative, like we were saying, if there are people that choose a negative path, then hey, they're just choosing that separation, but they're still part of the whole magnet.
I see what you're saying. And does that, okay, I really like hearing this because I've heard you say positive and negative before. When I've heard you say that, like negative, I think like negative entities or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Which I would think of as like demons or something like that, right? So given what I know about how you see the world, like, you know, 3 weeks ago, and I'm hearing you say positive or negative, like that doesn't fit in with the model of how I understand you to see the world when you say positive and negative, because you seem like a non-hierarchical thinker, a non-good bad thinker, right? That makes so much sense to me that when you're using positive and negative, you're really just speaking about magnetic properties, right? Yeah. So do we know that like what we call a positive charge in what's like the science of magnetism and like electromagnetic dynamics, I mean, you got or something, right?
You got it. You're good.
When we
you're nailing it.
When we say positive,
yeah,
when we're looking at electromagnetic dynamics, does that describe like the unifying process? Does negative describe some sort of like separation process? Like, do those terms line up with how we've constructed like spiritual meaning of those terms in terms of unifying and separation?
Here's to keep it very, very simple without getting super technical. I think the best example I can give you is if you literally just think about a magnet, a bar magnet, not a U magnet for this example. Like a bar magnet is literally just looks like there's a north and there's a south as we know it. We know that one end is going to be the end that attracts, you know, that you can stick it, it'll pull in the iron filaments, right? Then the other end, it will repel it. It's like you can't push them together.
Right.
And so when I'm saying and talking about this, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And when we put constructs of evil and good on these things, that's another conversation, and I don't see those as the same thing.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
And
Oh, yeah.
really, I think people get this mixed up. Even when I talk about the levels of consciousness, they think I'm talking about a hierarchy.
Right.
I'm just talking about this is the way that things can be measured.
Yes.
So when we move over to levels of consciousness for a second, if we're saying love, joy, and peace, enlightenment, and they're at the top of the levels or the scale, it's not that they're better. It's like they're just closer to that attractor field of unity.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I say positive, you're just closer to that attractor field of unity as well, because you're unified more, because you're attracting these things. And and we can say that love, it's hard to define. It's very, it's like one of the philosophical problems that we still face today. How do we define love? I could just say very simply, for a broad definition, love is the inclusion of things. Let's just say that, the inclusion.
Yes.
But that's, again, really hard to define. But if we just take the definition of love is the inclusion of hate, inclusion of fear, inclusion of sadness, inclusion of acceptance, inclusion, even love is the inclusion of willingness and courage. If it's all included, then the positive is not something that is better than the negative. They're just including the negative within it.
Yes.
And that also adds into the positive.
Yes. You know? So God, that's so good. I really appreciate that explanation. So when we're thinking about internal family systems and the parts work, right? If the capital S self is unconditionally loving, it just means that that's the part that knows how to relate inclusively to all parts within a person and to all parts, all things outside of a person, right? It doesn't have, and generally when parts are relating to each other, those parts are excluding each other. It's not it's not an inclusive experience. So that framework just really makes sense. I really like that a lot.
Yeah, that's why I really liked when I first started to explore that. That was the first time where I started to hear perspectives like that, where it was like these things can be true and it can be a paradox. And that's where I started to understand the concept of paradoxes a lot.
Right.
It's like there can be positive and negative, but there still can be unity within all.
Yeah.
How is that possible?
You know what's really cool to me about the hierarchy thing? I'm curious what you think about this. So the goal is to experience as much love as possible, right? Not because that's right or wrong. That's just the chosen goal. It feels better. It's more fulfilling, just whatever. So if the goal is to experience as much love as possible, well, what happens when you see David Hawkins' scale hierarchically and believe that love is better than fear? Right?
You comment on my videos.
What's that?
You comment on my videos talking shit. like plenty of people do. That's just how it goes.
That's amazing, right? So when you see love, when you see that scale as hierarchical, and the closer you get to the top, the better it is, and the closer you get to the bottom, the worse it is, you're setting yourself up to not achieve your said goal.
It won't happen.
It can't happen.
It's impossible.
Right.
Because you aren't including.
Right.
You're excluding.
So it's like love isn't the truth. Love is just what we want to experience. And if we want to experience more love, then we can't see love as the truth.
Then we have to define truth.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. If you want to have the truth conversation, that's a whole thing too.
Let's just say love as good.
Okay.
Love as good. So if we want to experience love, it is wise to not see love as good. Because when we see love as good, then we see whatever is not love as bad. And so when we see something that's not love as bad, if I see fear and I think that that's bad, then that puts me in a state of wanting to reject fear, which is a fear state. So seeing things as good and bad sets me up to experience less of my stated goal, which is love. Right? Did you see it similarly? Yeah.
It's a subtle nuance, but it's very important.
Right? It's very important.
Yeah. Because if you miss that, you might try to spend your whole life trying to get to love.
Yeah.
When it's like love is this thing that it can happen in an instant. It's a thing that can be here. And it's a thing that you don't have to achieve. And another point that I want to make is like love is something. It's so cliche, but I think it's important for this conversation. Love is something that's already here, but it's not something that you need to do. You need to have that's outside of you. It's like once we understand that love is has always been present, just like the sun has always been shining. The
Mm-hmm.
sun don't stop shining our whole life.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna
Mm-hmm.
be there. But even the sun is gonna we're not gonna see the sun sometimes. And that's just kind of the sun is a great example for how our life works for most people. People get lost. I've gotten lost
Mm-hmm.
in the game, and by lost I mean I'm suffering. I mean
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of putting those two terms together. If getting lost is suffering, I don't think it's something that is not meant to be happening. If that makes sense, it's
Yep.
like suffering is something that is just part of the
It's
game.
included.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so just it's not as though love isn't within the suffering, but love is just behind the clouds. It's just like
Mm-hmm.
the sun is behind the clouds. It's
Mm-hmm.
there, but we can't see it. And so it's like the continual process of seeing that, well, if we want to access love, we're removing those clouds, and then it goes back to that conversation we had earlier. How can we do that?
Mm-hmm.
And how can we do that from the perspective of the sun almost? And then that brings me to the question I never got to ask before we took that break earlier was, what do you think about the observer concept? Because I know the observer concept is Eckhart Tolle talks about that, and plenty other spiritual teachers have, and we've talked about the inner child and including that and the dynamics of it. So how do you see observer or witness consciousness in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah. So here's I think a tangible example of it.
Mhm.
I, when I was a little kid, I had a weird thing where there was part of me that thought it would be exciting for my parents to die because I would get attention and
You'd be
what I mean?
special of some sort.
Special,
Yeah.
right? Now, that was a thought that I had that I would like was ashamed of or wouldn't share. And then being a therapist, having a whole lot of access to people's experiences, like that's a very common thing. Many people have that experience of being a little kid and thinking it would be a good thing for their parents to die so they can be special. It's like, it's just an ego differentiation strategy, right? And we
Mhm.
also have all these strategies available to us where sometimes we think that being seen as inferior is our best survival strategy, which does sometimes work,
Because we're staying in the crowd.
Exactly, right? Exactly. It's like guaranteed belonging. The community will take care of me for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So here's how I see it. If a person has that thought and then they judge that thought as like, well, that means I'm a terrible person. I should be ashamed of that. Like, there's no way I can say that. That person is, let me actually not even go there. What I'll say is that what I find to be a very enjoyable, satisfying experience of life is to see a thought like that and say, wow, what an incredibly fascinating thing that thought exists in the human psyche. Like I get to watch the human psyche happen. I get to watch these thoughts that are happening that are just phenomena. They're just occurrences. And I get to just witness those things rather than being enmeshed with those things, thinking that that thought says something about who I am or defines me. So that is, I think, like what the utility of the observer perspective is to be like, I have access to this thing called human psyche, and I get to fucking watch this like a movie. And
Mm-hmm.
the more I think that certain things that happen in there will get me to be rejected. When I'm thinking that thoughts are bad, it's because I think that presenting the right persona is the thing that gets me to be safe. Right? Because
That was me for so long.
Right?
That was me.
Presenting the right
The
persona.
teacher.
Yeah. Needing to
Which
be
is
that.
like I'm transitioning out of, not just being that. I can be that. It's like I was trying to prove that these concepts were right with evidence or, instead of just expressing the unknowingness, but the ponderance of it could be, which is what I'm now realizing is like, it doesn't have to be so serious. And people don't want to be, I feel like people don't want to be directly shown the truth a lot of times. And I've seen this in my own life. That's why I say that. It's like when you have a story tied to it, the story I think unlocks. That's why movies are so powerful, because a lot of times in my life, I don't know, I watch movies and it like inspires me and it unlocks something. And a lot of people hated the Rings of Power show, but it did kind of get me in this concept of like, the show wasn't super fantastic, but like being in that universe of like possibility and all the things of that I worry about that are trivial. Like there's something about the story of seeing that, and I'm seeing the value in that instead of it like I don't have to directly I don't have to directly tell you the truth as the only way that you'll get it.
Right. Right. You could, right. Yeah. Do you, there's this rapper named Talib Kweli. Have you ever heard of him?
No.
Okay. So Talib Kweli was part of these rappers in like late 90s, early 2000s that were sort of like kind of put in the category of like conscious rap. He's like very thoughtful, complex, analytic, like really great, powerful statements about culture and society, like cool stuff. Mos Def is also in there, Common, MF Doom, kind of in the same category. Talib Kweli was my least favorite of all those people. Anytime Talib Kweli was rapping, it sounded like he had just Googled something and was looking up the Wikipedia explanation of this thing. Whereas other rappers like Mos Def were conveying concepts through story. I think it's so much more of an effective, creative, inspirational, beautiful thing to be able to convey concepts through poetry and through story, to say the thing without having to say the thing. Whereas Talib Kweli was like probably thinking he needed to be teacher archetype. Like he needed to say this thing in the smartest way possible, which made me like, I have that thing too. I'm like a recovering, need to be seen as smart person.
Yeah.
But in seeing it in him, it made me want to reject it. I wanted to be Mos Def, who was poetic, but I didn't know how to do it. And the more overwhelmed I felt, the more I would go into like smart teacher persona. So I get it, but it's also just not as effective.
Yeah. And it's almost like I'm realizing that you try to show up as someone else so that when they don't like you, you can just say I'm just being that part of you.
Oh, yeah.
And then it's like if you're the true freedom is in just being you. And then if people don't like you, it's tough at the beginning because I was just talking to Matt, my friend, about this, and it was like, well, if people don't like you for who you really are, then that might actually say something about you. But then the truth is that if people don't like you for who you really are, at least you were really yourself in the end.
Yeah.
And you can always say, hey, if you don't like me for who I really am, that's ultra confidence.
Uh-huh.
You get to the point where if you're really who you want to be fully, I mean that's another thing that I'm really researching, and I have been, and now just really learning to embody. It's like, hey, if I'm me, what's the ultimate goal of my life? Is the ultimate goal of my life to be this person so that people will achieve a means to an end, which is what you're kind of saying Jordan Peterson is. And to me, it's like, well, if I can just actually be what I want to be, maybe I'll make more of a difference. Maybe I won't, but I'll be at least be able to say I was myself, and I enjoy being myself more than trying to put up a front or just share one part of me. It doesn't have to be a front. It can just be like, well, that's what I thought was best.
Yep.
It's not like you did it on purpose or you were trying to be nefarious or you're trying to manipulate, because I wasn't. It was like, that's just what I thought was the best way.
Yes.
And that's another thing too, is to see the humility in people. It's like, maybe they're just doing that because that's what they think is the best way and they don't know any better. And it's not like it's a problem, but you can see that language playing out in other people.
I think that the be yourself advice is like, it's the best advice in the sense that, like, when we're investing energy into thinking that presenting as something else, or that there's a version of us that's preferable or preferred to who we actually are, like, that's a shitty experience of life. It doesn't feel good. And the medicine is to be yourself. But then there's the question, then it's the worst advice, because it's like, what does
the
that mean?
self? Yeah, dude, I just talked
that?
about that. Yeah. It's like, be yourself is bullshit, because there's no, you are being yourself right now.
No matter what.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as inauthentic.
How can you not be yourself?
Right. So what I think is like, this is why I think the getting clear on what you're experiencing and having a word to describe it, joyful, grounded, peaceful, whatever, is so valuable, because to me, yourself is a story that your mind constructs to make sense of whatever you're feeling in any particular moment, right? Now, people, let's say someone is like struggling with dating, and the advice that people give that person is, oh, just be yourself. When they're dating, they might be operating with some idea that like, oh, I need to, okay, I need to find the right person. There might be there, I don't know, that person might be anxious while they're dating, right? So that person, when they're dating, is the anxious version of them, right? Now, the result that they might want to produce is to go into a relationship so they can experience joy, whatever, right? Being the anxious version of them is not a strategy, not an approach that's likely to produce what they want, right? So in that sense, for that person who's like historically being herself means being anxious, like that's not going to get her what she wants. What we're really talking, because you said a word like, what's the best thing? What am I going to enjoy the most? What we're really talking about when we're saying be yourself is be the joyful version of you, or be the grounded version of you, or be the like loving version of you. And so I think that there's no such thing as our self, but we do have certain selves that are expressions of different emotional states. And what makes sense is to get clear on the emotions that we want to experience, and be clear that whether or not this person likes me back doesn't dictate my access to this emotional state. My access to groundedness is unconditional. So even if this person walks up and leaves in the middle of the date, I still have access to groundedness, which means I can be the grounded version of myself while I'm on this date, which is then more likely to produce the result of that person liking me back.
Yeah, because if people don't like you, and if you're you, well, that's good that you know that they don't like you, because it's much better than trying to be someone else.
Right. If this person doesn't like the grounded version of me, or the version of me that's making an attempt to be loving, then like that's okay. It's okay.
You're not for everyone.
Not for everyone, but also what I think is really important to understand is like, when you're living life that way, you already have the thing that you think you'll get if this person likes you back. If I think that this person liking me back will give me groundedness or safety, but I'm already grounded, then I'm not attached to them liking me back. I already have the thing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It doesn't give me some.
That's it. Keep going. Yeah. That's it. I'm just like blown away. Yeah.
What I do think is true is that like I came here and I like my intentions were to be like joyful, have fun, that kind of stuff, right? Now, I could be joyful and have fun, and you could not like me, right? And I could still access joy. But if you're experiencing joy and groundedness and fun too, well, that multiplies the experience. It amplifies it, right? So it's like we already have what we want, but just like you with your camper, when you're in your camper, it's going to amplify it. It's going to give you more, like a more intense experience of what you want. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. 100%. So what we're going to do is I'm going to set this camera up so it's on both of us, and then we'll kind of wrap up. You're on Universe the Game. We can't see it anymore. But have you seen any aspects of, like, for you? My perspective is that we're in a sort of simulation or a game or whatever you want to call it, that we can interact with and interface with, and it's holographic. And this is what I've found through the research, that it could be. It's more than likely. Now, have you seen any game aspects of reality for you? And how would you see those playing out? Like, if you were, let's keep this very simple. If life was a game, what do you think some important things to know about it would be? For you, in your life?
I think that if life is a game, the important things to know is that the only game that we can know exists is the game that's being played in this moment right now. So, like a lot of people, for thousands of years, people are like, just be with this moment, right? But I think that people struggle to actually experience that because for some reason their mind has constructed that there's some threat in the environment and they need to escape this moment and be in another moment, right? I think that if we move into that creator consciousness that we've been speaking about, like right here is a creative no matter what I'm doing. If I'm making tea, if I'm turning the turn signal on my car, if I'm making some piece of content for Instagram, no matter if I'm having sex, no matter what is happening, there's a creative opportunity. And to me, playing the game really well is choosing in any given moment what we want to create and creating that. That, in my experience, seeing the world that way, like, so right now we're sitting, what do I want to create? Well, we're speaking. So there's a conversation. How do I want the conversation to be? I'd like to experience joy during it. I'd like to experience curiosity. Okay, I'm creating a joyful, curious conversation, or at least co-creating that, right? So my experience has told me that when we start to see that there's a creative opportunity in every single moment, every moment that we are in starts to become a moment where there are an abundance of resources. And when our minds perceive that we're in an environment with an abundance of resources, then there's nothing to escape anymore. So that, I think that as far as I can currently tell, that is a great way to play the game.
That is a fantastic answer. I like to get that question in every time just because I'm so curious.
Great question.
Yeah, I'm just curious as to how, if it is, I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but how could that benefit us?
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I've seen it benefit me, and that's why I was curious about you. So, last question for you: if you decided that, I could take this a bunch of different ways. Let's say that you were Starseed. Let's bring it back to the beginning of the conversation. Please, yes. And you know what? You got the call. Your time's done on Earth. Shit, man, you're done. You're like, okay, well, this is the last time I'm ever going to talk to humanity. Right now, I'm going to walk out of that garage, and that's it. You weren't going to be able to talk to humanity or Earth ever again. And you knew that moment was coming and that it was here. What would be the message that you would leave humanity with? And now it could be anything from a sentence, a quote. People have said one word, 3 words. I've had people give me pages and pages of their beautiful perspective. So there's no better or worse. But if you just were like, what is something that I really want to leave the earth with having said or told people about how I experience life, what do you think that would be?
Beautiful. That's not the word, but maybe it is. Okay. Get clear on knowing when you are excluding something. Get clear on what it feels like to exclude something, and then start to live life being really excited when you feel yourself excluding, because that gives you the material you need in order to learn how to include that thing. So be able to identify what it is that you're excluding. The way to identify what you're excluding is in your body. Your body, like the experience of contraction is the thing that lets you know you've been conditioned to exclude something, and be excited about finding that. Because when you find that, then you can make a choice to love or include that thing. And if you live your whole life like that, everything is an exciting opportunity. There's nothing to be afraid of.
There it is. All right, man. Thanks for coming on the podcast today. Where can people find you?
On Instagram, I'm at Flynn Skidmore. That's the best place to find me.
Cool. And they can find all the stuff you're doing.
All the stuff.
All right. Go follow him. He is amazing, as you can see. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. We'll see you next time on Universe Game. All right.